I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to tell me if you agree with it. Okay. So I saw a few people, and I said, guess who's coming in on Friday? So when I was at this event last night, and like, I don't know who. And I said, it's the godfather of security. I told that to 2 people, and I want you to guess how many of them said it was you.
None of them?
Both of them.
That's amazing. Yeah, actually, Pam Fusco gave me that title. She's on the board of ISSA.
I'm not familiar with her.
She's the CISO of Splunk right now.
Okay.
But you probably haven't met her, but that's something she referred to me as.
Okay, the godfather of security. So normally when you think of the word godfather, you think of someone that's been around the game for a while, right? I think of like Al Capone, in Chicago.
Yeah.
So now he got busted for tax evasion. So hopefully we're not that kind of godfather.
No.
But he was one of the original gangsters, right? And there's a lot of other people that you think about when you think of Godfather. You think of maybe like Sopranos, right? Or you think of the movies like The Bronx Tale, or Marlon Brando, right? Mm-hmm. The actual movie, The Godfather.
Yeah.
But I forget who told me that they considered you the Godfather. It might have been Kim. So it might have been Kim, because he had mentioned that you were a big inspiration and you were a big part of his journey. Right? He explicitly called you out. He said he listed a few people, and your name was one of them. So even people like him that have been around for 40 years in the security space, they look up to you, right?
We've done some mutual mentoring.
Okay.
First time I met Kim, he was giving a presentation at ISSA, and after he was done, I went up to him and I said, we have to know each other, because I could have given your presentation right down to the punchline.
Really? What was the punchline?
It was about risk management. There wasn't really any punchline, but you know how he makes jokes as he's going along? I said I could have given that same presentation.
So you guys are like kindred spirits in the security world. Okay. So the first time you ever met him, how long ago was this?
About 19 years ago, 18 or 19 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
So when you first met Kim, you were a CISO. And I think back then, I have to think, recalling your timeline, I don't remember where you were. It was before early warning.
I was at early warning.
Oh, you were at early warning at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So early warning is interesting, right? Because from what I know, from when they first started out, it was fraud detection.
That was it, yes.
Right? But it was this company that no one really knew of, but they were working with all the largest banks in the world, or at least locally or partially managed by, I think it was 7 of the largest banks.
In the beginning, it was five major banks.
Was it 5? Okay. Now, I think it was in 2014 or 2015, they released Zelle, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the modern day money transfer app. So there's a lot of interesting stories there. I'm sure we can get to, hopefully. But what I think the one thing that I'm most curious about is the shirt, the NASA shirt, right? Now, obviously, we spoke before you came in, just for a little bit, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but tell me about the Apollo missions.
Well, it's really I don't know that much about the Apollo mission. I mean, the Apollo 13 is what you're referring to.
Correct.
Well, first let me talk about Apollo 11. Like I said, I was almost 19 when they landed on the moon. Mm-hmm. So obviously I wasn't at NASA yet. But most people don't realize that when they landed on the moon, the Eagle, the lunar lander, the computer died. And Neil Armstrong had to manually land on the moon. There were 11 seconds of dead air. And then the astronauts came on and said, Houston, this is Tranquility Base. The Eagle has landed. Mm-hmm. And the people there in the Space Center, they were just like, well, we're breathing again here. Because you can imagine 11 seconds, nobody's ever landed on the moon. Did they hit the moon and bounce off? Did they land in the moon dust and just become nothing? Mm-hmm. What's happening in 11 seconds? You can think of a lot of bad things have happened.
Yeah, and and I may sound dumb when I say this, but it's fair to assume there was no video transmission.
There was nothing. They were waiting. There was all audio waiting in telemetry, and NASA Mission Control Center was just sitting there waiting
Wow.
for the next transmission. So that was Apollo 11. Apollo 13 is the one that the reason I talk about it is because of the movie with Tom Hanks in it. Ed Harris, who played Gene Kranz, people relate to that. They remember, this guy, this flight director in a white vest. So it's easy for me to say I worked at NASA, so you'll understand I'm not just saying some other government agency. If I tie people to the Apollo 13 mission, they'll see Gene Kranz. And Gene's comment about Ed's performance was, I couldn't have done that job better than Ed Harris. Ed Harris played him perfectly. He did say failure is not an option. And I was very fortunate to work for Gene because of all the executives I ever worked for, he was the one that was most truly interested and believed in the aspect of security. I was in a meeting with him and his executive assistant talking about security, and his executive assistant I said something about security on the PC, and his executive assistant, we don't need you getting in our way there, da, 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 da. And Gene turned around, jumped right in his stuff, and said, I'm not taking a chance on one bad bit of information getting from that PC into the operational increment, which would be loaded on board. No, we're going to take care of security. No one has died on my watch. It's not going to happen now. That's him.
So I guess the first thing that I think of when you say that is there's a clear difference in the way that people approach security. This was like 60 years ago, right? Or at least 50. I'm not sure the year of Apollo 13, to be honest. But there at the time there was a clear difference of people that had access to some of the most confidential information and people that were managing them.
Right.
But there were two different mindsets, clearly, because Gene was the opinion of nothing bad happens on my watch, but yet the people that were part of his team, right? If I were to liken it to something today, we could even say it's kind of like a CISO compared to an analyst, where the analyst was just looking to get the job done, whereas Gene, the CISO or the director said, look, not on my watch. So it's interesting to me because today, I don't think it's the same way. I don't think that the people in security at the analyst level or at any level below, management would look at security from the same perspective. So to me, it's what I find very interesting is how did the world exist before security?
Great question, because actually today people are saying CDW isn't a security event. But it is a security event. When you look about security defined as the protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information, there was a serious availability issue today because of that bad software.
The CrowdStrike stuff.
Yes, I meant CrowdStrike, not CDW, but CrowdStrike.
Okay.
So and to back up a bit, I started in the Army Security Agency. There, the most important thing was confidentiality. Keeping top secret information top secret. Trying to find out what secrets we could gather from sensing the environment of our enemies' communications, trying to break their secrets. That's confidentiality. Gene was first of all focused on integrity and availability. And we worried about confidentiality. But I talk about it laughingly as we had confidentiality as a little c, not a big C. So, but my manual for the security program there was one of the first documented programs based on security as confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
So are you the reason that triangle exists, or?
No, I didn't create the triangle. There were a lot of discussions in the late 80s. Don Parker had defined security. He was MITRE, a PhD, and he defined security as confidentiality, integrity, availability, usability, functionality, and something else. 6 things, well defined, super definition. And I had a discussion at, I think it was 1989 or 90 National Security Conference. I had a discussion with him about this, and I said, Don, that's great, but nobody's going to remember all that stuff. If we talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, CIA people will understand, remember CIA, and it connects, and because of the agency. So
he had this grand idea of 5 to 6 different topics.
right.
So you're the reason that they distilled it?
No, I was one of the voices in the crowd.
Okay.
But I was my manual for the Johnson Space Center, for mission operations at Johnson Space Center, was one of the first programs to document a program based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
So not to jump into the future, but just top of mind, because availability is an issue today with the event, would you say that today's was an incident or was a mistake?
I think it was both. It was a mistake that caused an incident. The incident, the outage, when you have people having a blue screen of death on their computer and the computer's not there, just because a hacker didn't do it doesn't mean it wasn't bad.
It's kind of like a self-inflicted wound.
Yes.
You ever see those videos of like the cops when they're training and, they put the pistol back in the holster, but they accidentally shoot their foot? It's kind of what I think of when I think of what happened today.
Well, it's funny. One of the war stories I tell is I was at a company and the director of HR came to me and said, we just had one of our senior programmers quit, and the reason he quit is he referenced all these security things he has to deal with. And she thought I was going to say, oh, no, such an important guy. And I just looked at her and I said, good. Now, but the segue to that is I was doing the right thing in putting those security controls in place, but I wasn't doing it the right way. I discovered later if I would work with the developers and help fund some of their trainings to get them on board, get them develop good code, and have them demonstrate to me that they were doing the right thing, have them proud of their work instead of me looking over their shoulder calling their baby ugly, it was a whole different paradigm.
So the whole idea of shifting left was what wasn't existent at the time, but you kind of saw the writing on the wall.
Well, it wasn't solid. I learned from my own self-inflicted wounds, exactly, yes. I mean, having that guy, senior programmer, leave, that wasn't good. But it was good that he thought that he was going to make a difference. I mean, if he thought that he had to do his own thing without controls, I actually had a CIO. When I was in a company and we had BlackBerries for communication, and the iPhone came out.
Oh, so this was like 2000 to...
About 2006-ish.
2000. I would say 2000, 2005 is probably the range.
Yeah, so...
BlackBerries were the thing in the 90s.
Yeah, right? So we were using BlackBerries, and he said, I want to use an iPhone. I said, they're not secure. And he said, I would think as CIO, I should have the ability to use whatever hardware I want. And I said, no, he was missing the whole concept of security. Security was an add-on, maybe option if he felt like it. Instead of a fundamental part of running the business.
Yeah, and I think it goes to say the same thing. And even back in the NASA time, is security wasn't necessarily part of it. Whereas now there's a lot of new companies that are coming out where it is a security first approach. Right?
Absolutely.
So it only took like 50 or 60 years for people to kind of learn that security should be part of the DNA and not just an accessory, like a clothing accessory that you wear. But you've seen it from both sides. You've seen it from the very beginning where security wasn't even necessarily a category, right?
Absolutely. When I learned security, I was in the Army Security Agency. To me, security was protecting confidentiality of my information. Integrity and availability, I learned those concepts when I got into NASA. And back to the conversation about security, in HIPAA, the HIPAA privacy rule was passed before the security rule. And if you talk to a healthcare security person, oftentimes, at least in the early 2000s, they would say privacy is most important and security is kind of the way we do it. And I would argue, I said, well, security to me is the big umbrella, and part of what I do is provide for your privacy. I worry also about the integrity and availability of the data. So a discussion I've had before about privacy versus confidentiality.
I guess I never really linked them like that.
So I grew up understanding confidentiality for sure. And then when I got to the Space Center, obviously integrity and availability was the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. So if we think about the space station, right, the first thing that comes to mind is there was a rush to get to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Between, JFK wants to go to the moon. We're going to be the first people on the moon. Russia's trying to do the same thing.
Right.
Right. So do you think that a lot of parts of security came as a result of that because of the conflict between the U.S. and Russia, and the fact that computers were kind of coming into the main scene, and people were thinking that around privacy and confidentiality, we have to protect what we know so that way the Russians don't get it, and that maybe like the original origin of security where people were actually worried about information integrity, confidentiality, privacy, availability, that a lot of that was born out of the Cold War or born out of the space race, rather? Or do you think that there were ideas of security prior to that, just it wasn't being executed at the corporate level?
Well, I think competition drives, whether it's communist or capitalism, whatever, competition drives speed, causes you to hurry up. Now, when you hurry up, you take shortcuts sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of security that we talk about today was not a concept back then. It was do the right thing, build good, reliable products that are going to meet the needs of the mission. It's funny. I remember seeing a hatch for the Soviet space station, and it's interesting how the dimensions match up to the dimensions for ours.
Interesting.
So maybe it was a lucky guess,
or maybe.
So the competition is still there. The competition, but the thing now is we can no longer just go full speed ahead. We have to be aware of those torpedoes in the water. We have to be aware of hackers. I'm very concerned with AI. In fact, very concerned with AI that's what we're doing. People are turning to AI and running with AI like flying blind on a rocket cycle, to quote Flash Gordon.
Yeah, I think so there was an event in town yesterday that I went to,
mm-hmm.
and in one of the panels, I don't know who it was that said it, but it was definitely said. And interestingly enough, they were talking about AI, right? Because every topic now is AI. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We can just be clear about that. Is if you're not talking about AI, you're missing out.
Right.
So of course, one of the topics was AI, and in this topic, or in this session, one of the gentlemen had talked about how now by embracing AI, we have the ability, and this is where, I didn't fall out of my chair, but I was thinking to myself, like, hang on a second, man, hang on, like, calm down, because his exact words, I don't remember them, so we'll paraphrase what I heard, and it was, we can just have AI write our code.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just have it write the code, and then our people become way more efficient with their time. And all of a sudden, now we've got better stuff, right? And the first thought that I had was, just because someone can do it faster doesn't make it better, right? Just because there is a tool that can make your life easier doesn't mean it's okay. And just because you have access to it doesn't mean that you should. Because when you think of the LLMs that exist, if you're feeding them information
Right.
that is continually bad
Right.
into the model,
Right.
the output is garbage in, garbage out, right? That's just how models work. If you have bad data in, you get bad data out. So when he said that, what came to my mind was, okay, this is great. You're looking to develop faster. You want to get things out to market faster. I understand the incentive behind that. But if you're doing it with poor controls in place, simply because you just want to get it done faster because you can, that doesn't necessarily make it right. And not that I was frustrated, but no one called them out on that. No one said, well, there's an issue with that because if we are relying on a tool that has the potential to be operating off of incomplete, poor, bad information, the output would be no better than what the input was. But no one said anything, and they just kept talking, and they kind of like just glossed over the fact that there is a supercomputer somewhere out there that can help me be better at my job. But at the security conference, and I'm sure people in the audience were thinking this, but no one on stage called them out and said, look, like, I get the incentive, but I think it's a poor strategy.
I'm thinking I should have been there. Every security conference needs an old curmudgeon like me in the audience screaming, you're crazy. The reason I say that is, as you were talking, remember Reagan said, trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
When ChatGPT came out, I asked it, I said, how can I trust what you're telling me is true? And it said, you need to be able to verify what I tell you. Well, that's so cool, because when I was in the Army, I was teaching soldiers electronics. And sometimes on their test, I would put the question 2 + 2 equals. They'd pull out their calculator. And sometimes they will double check using their calculator twice before they'd put the answer down.
Really?
Yeah, because instead of relying just on their own elementary education, they'll put the answer down. Now, if they, instead of using a calculator, had been using AI, just think if that AI was using a database based off Orwell's 1984. 2 + 2 might equal 5, might be an acceptable response, and in fact might be the preferred response. Mm-hmm. Because that's the way it is, because of the database. Another thing I like to say about it, you have an AI engine. That engine is a program that was written by a person who has individual biases, professional bias, personal bias, social biases when they're writing their program. And they're incorporating chunks of code from GitHub and other places that they have no idea about the integrity of it. And they're putting it into the engine to make it the thing it's going to think. Well, let's say that even if that engine is perfect, and you ask that engine, that AI engine, a religious question, you'll either get an answer of hellfire and damnation or love and forgiveness, depending upon whether the data is from the Old Testament or New Testament. Mm-hmm. So I'm not trusting blindly AI. Another example I like to use is firewalls. You have a program running that's checking all the connections, and you're finding that from one particular IP address, you're getting all these failed logon attempts. Obviously, from someone from that IP address is trying to hack into your system. Well, the smart AI program shuts that IP address off, unless your AI program that's doing that monitoring has code written in it that says, to be sure to exclude all actions at that IP address. Allow that IP address to do whatever it wants. And how would you know that exclusion isn't written into your program unless you wrote all the code of the engine that's monitoring it?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of along the lines of what I was thinking, is if you're relying on a tool because it's the latest and greatest, but you don't necessarily take a step back, maybe even, as Kim says, half a step back to kind of evaluate what you're looking at, you run the risk that you fall, we'll say susceptible to bad information, right? But it kind of reminds me of like Wikipedia, right? It's all human sourced, right?
Yes.
Like, there's everything on that, like, was submitted by a person, right? There's potentially the risk that information is bad, right? But a lot of times when I was in school, people would try and cite Wikipedia. You can't cite Wikipedia, man. It's prone to error, right? You can cite peer-reviewed articles for a reason, right? Peer-reviewed, kind of assumes that it wasn't just you looking at it. There were other industry experts reviewing it. You could cite, and this might have been a bad one, but you could cite a news article, because a lot of news articles or news entities, tend to have some bias, right? Well, that one's on the fence. That one's kind of there, kind of not. Peer reviewed maybe is obviously industry experts, better output, right? Or you could cite a book,
Right.
but books tend to be a lot of opinions, unless they're, or you could cite .gov.edu.
There again, you're a little shaky ground too.
So here's the crazy part is, if you're writing an article, some sort of document, and your references, the sites that you're referencing within your own article, there's a possibility that the information was bad, or there's a possibility that it was wrong.
Right.
Then that article becomes the golden standard for whatever the topic is, right? And I'll give you a really good example. Is, I'm sure, so you've heard of Simon Sinek, right? When he starts talking about the golden circle, the why, who we are, what we do, why we do it, he actually based it off of a scientific study of someone from, I believe it was either the 60s or 70s, on the reptilian brain. So what he says is it's biology, right? It's biology that this is, these are the ways that the reptilian brain works, right? And it was a theory that was, at some point between then and now, refuted and challenged, right? But in his book, he doesn't ever indicate that that was the case. He ties it to biology, says there were studies, so that way it gives his position more, we'll say, more ground to stand on.
Right.
But if you look into it, not that anything he says is wrong or bad, he's actually got a lot of really good stuff, but the basis for one of his most popular book, and what kind of brought him into the spotlight, was based on a study of an actual professional that essentially was frowned upon. But that's never talked about, right? And it's very similar when I think of that and how he was able to take something that was frowned upon by the community, the scientific community even, and turned it into something that had mass appeal, mass marketing, right? But if you look back into the history of it, there are scientists that will say this particular person, that he took his work and kind of adjusted it to be more so about people and the way people work, isn't consistent. And it ties to something that we do not stand behind. But you don't ever hear that story, right? In fact, it's probably been buried, but there are articles out there that talk about it. To me, AI and the people that are using it kind of is going along the same path, to where if the information that is being presented is from a source that is not good, well, just in the simplest terms, bad data, then the output is good. Never, right? The output is never good. But when you disguise it as something different than what it was on the input,
Right.
and you say this is the newest technology, there are a lot of parallels between doing that and taking someone's bad information and saying, well, technically it's linked to a study, right? Technically it's linked to data, but you don't talk about the integrity of the data, you've kind of essentially done the same thing that he's done. And then now you market it as, this is the latest and greatest, this is the best thing possible. And then people take that and they run with it and then they use it. But they don't necessarily look into the actual source. Because I would guarantee you, if people looked into the source of Sinek's, his start with why, they might say, this is not consistent with what the scientific community views of the actual researchers, paperwork,
Right.
that he references. And then his now start with why would have had far less credibility. That story is buried somewhere, right? But it does exist. So my fear is that there are a lot of people with a shiny object that has two letters, A and I. But there's a lot of people missing out on the fact that where the data comes from and how that information is built and the potential risk with the bias that it could have could lend itself into a bad output. So that was like 5 minutes of me just rambling, but I mean, do you agree?
Well, absolutely. I make things simple. Fox or MSNBC.
Depends on which side you're on.
I mean, you can see the same broadcast, the same subject. You will get two different views, which is the reason why when there's a political speech, I try to listen to it in real time, or I record it live and listen to it from the source instead of listen to one person's interpretation versus another person's interpretation. I'm very distrustful.
Yeah, well, it exists everywhere you go.
So AI is nothing but the same thing. In fact, to give you even a better example, I saw the FBI showed me a video of Nixon eulogizing the death of the two astronauts that died while trying to land on the moon.
Yeah.
They didn't die. So,
oh, you said died on the moon. I was thinking the one flight that blew up.
no, this is deep fake. I mean, I was around when Nixon was around. Yes, it looked and sounded like him, but they didn't die.
So the deep fake was around even back then.
Well, no, it wasn't. It was a more recent version, but it was done off of his picture.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into the mismal information, where it's something that Mike has talked about, something that I know Lester's talked about in a lot of their talk tracks in a lot of these events. It's mis-dis-mal information. So misinformation, disinformation, malinformation.
Right.
So yeah, I mean it's everywhere, right? It's persistent anywhere you go, and I think even when you tie it to current events, there are people that you can find this on YouTube pretty easily today, where there's people walking around saying, "What do you think about the Trump assassination attempt?"
Yeah, we could spend the next 2 hours talking about that, and I've gotten multiple reports from really wild stuff about that. So I don't even want to go there.
No, we won't. But
yeah, I'm just saying
with people that are asking this question, they're getting two sides.
Yep.
Right. They're getting he's a hero. God saved him.
Right.
He's going to be our next president. And then you have other people that say it was staged.
Yep.
People, it's a fake. It was a setup.
Right.
This is nothing different than
I've heard that.
JFK is similarly to JFK 2.0.
I even got a report just yesterday of someone else on a water tank, may have been the shooter, and this guy was just a Ponz. He never even took the shot.
Who knows, right?
The grassy knoll from John F. Kennedy's assassination.
Right. But all this to say is that the way it's presented is based on the bias of the author or the presenter.
Right.
So, how do you put guardrails around AI? In your opinion, if you have the opinion that,
do.
It's bad in equals bad out, biased in equals biased out. How do you have the most pure form of it?
This is such an interesting question for me to deal with, because my dad was a mechanic. And I remember when vacuum assist and then computers came to cars. Prior to that, he could pull the distributor off. He could show me, everything. In fact, he made parts to fix cars. I mean, it was like, now, if he was still alive, first of all, you have to remove all the plastic to get to the engine, and then you have to deal with the computer. It either works or doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It's not something he would be able to fix. That's where AI is. AI is this thing that's making decisions for us. In my book, in my manual for the Mission Control Center, Johnson Space Center, the program, I had the Computer Security Act of 1986 to go on. I had OECD principles for data security from 1980, 11 principles. Those are in my book on Alchemy of Information Protection. That's what I had to work off of, besides the Orange book and the Rainbow series, if you've heard of it. Mm-hmm. There we talk about things like subject accessing an object over a trusted path. Okay. This is fundamental. And like I've said before, I actually grew up inside of the computer. I've repaired a computer by replacing a single transistor. I've written programs with ones and zeros. Not in assembly language, but actually machine language. So I understand the ins and outs in the inside. And in the early days of writing programs, there used to be a requirement for a code review. And that would be, I would write the code and have one or two other people review my code manually and say, yes, this is good code, most efficient. Well, we got to the point where we had programs that would review code and tell us if there were dead spots or if it was working. That's where we are now. We're depending on AI to review code that was written, and we're trusting code to trust code that we don't know. It's a big level of trust out there. That brings me back to something that I created in my program for risk management. If I found a problem in protecting data in a company, I would go to that department's head, the department who was the custodian or owner of that data, and I would present them, this is a risk. These are things we need to do to protect this data. And I think if I could carefully articulate the risk, then the owner of the data could make a risk-based decision on whether we need to get IT to fix it, or whether we need to store it some other way or some other place. But we'd have a good risk-based discussion. Mm-hmm. AI is to the point to where we're running, like I said, with competition, we're running full speed. Department heads are saying, I need this AI program to review this data to give me my result. And they may not be thinking about who created the engine, what data is coming in to make the decision. Is it their data? And if it is their data, are they running their engine locally, or are they putting their data in the cloud where somebody else may have access to their data? This is a whole conundrum that we're dealing with today, a level of trust that we're extending ourselves out there. And I don't know that the risk-based decisions are being made appropriately to say, yes, I'm going to accept the risk for running my program that way.
Well, do you think the risk isn't being accepted because the time to market requirements, where people are rushing to get to market, and then as a result, like you said earlier, when you rush, you cut corners. So is the end game then one where it starts and stops with we should have gone back and moved slower, or what is the end game become?
That's it. We have to go fast and we have to go slow at the same time. It's no easy answer. I remember an executive telling me, Well, that's Microsoft. I trust Microsoft. Microsoft is too big to fail. Those are things he said to me. Okay, I understand that concept. Because Microsoft has a lot of customers and they can't, in fact, afford to have a failure. But we don't want to go into a risk-based decision with our eyes closed. Like I said, I created a risk acceptance form. And I would take this form to that department head and say, here's what I understand, and this is what you need to understand before we make this decision. A lot of companies, they just look to their CISO and say, should we do it or not do it? If they ask the CISO, sometimes they'll just kind of throw data out in the cloud and use it and not realizing they're exposing the company's data to risk in the cloud. Like I said before, I worked for Gene Kranz there at the Space Center. I remember once that we were replacing a Unisys mainframe with a network with networked Unix workstations.
Okay.
And I wasn't invited to the design review.
Oh, there's a reason.
But I found out about it, and I snuck in the back of the auditorium. And they're about ready to throw holy water on this design. And I said, hey, what about audit? Oh, we don't have money for audit. I said, wrong answer. I said, you might not be able to get 300 computers. You might have to get 250 computers, or you'll have audit. And they said, well, says who? And I said, me, but if you don't believe me, go ask Gene. They thought for a second, and they said, what do you mean by audit?
Oh.
Gene cared. That created a dialogue where we could talk about what audit was and take the appropriate risk-based steps.
So they were going to forego a category or the audit part because they just didn't understand it.
They didn't understand it. It was inconvenient, so then put it into place, and it's just the security guy. But then now that it's not just the security guy, but the director, then they have to go and justify to the director why they want to do something that's risky. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different thing. And that's also on my risk acceptance form that I mentioned. I would take this and I'd give it to a department head, and he would say, what happens if I sign this form and we just don't fix it? I said, well, if this thing breaks, I won't be the only one being fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said, well, what happens if I don't break it? I said, if I don't sign, I said, that's fine. I'll just take this to your boss.
Someone has to accept responsibility.
I'm not accepting the risk. I'm the guy that's there telling you, here's the risk and here's the things we should do about it. And it's your data. If you want to protect it, if you don't, if you want to leave the vault doors open overnight without a guard, it's your data that's in the vault.
So how do you have do you call it like a RAF form?
RAF form is what I call it.
Okay, just risk acceptance.
Risk acceptance form, yeah.
And I'm going to guess that Kim got that from you?
Yes.
So he actually told me a story where it was, I don't remember the specifics, but it was basically there was someone that was rubber stamping everything, just, accept. And then the minute something happened, that same person tried to get him fired. Mm-hmm. And I think it was him and Clyde, I believe it was Clyde at the time, who was his boss, said, no, we have this. And then, of course, once you have the rubber stamping guy that accepted the risk, he accepted his severance paperwork as well.
Yeah.
So interesting that, you're talking about the form and Kim, who's kind of, met you at some point 20 years ago, kind of took that part, or I imagine took it from your experience, right? But do you think that exists today around AI, or is it an area? So when you talked about audit, the reason that they didn't do it was because they didn't understand it.
Right.
Are there people out there shouting from a mountaintop that we don't understand AI the way that we should, and they're demanding some sort of acceptance form? But there's people that are, very similar to the people that went through this other process that neglected the audit part. Like, is AI become the new audit, where you don't understand it but you just kind of just go with the flow?
I don't know, but I feel in my gut that people are running so fast. They're grabbing the latest AI tool and saying, well, this is good, and they're using it maybe appropriately, maybe not appropriately, and making decisions instead of saying, okay, what is the pedigree of this tool, and what is my risk of using it? What is the source of the data? Is it my data? Where am I using my data? What are the decisions? How heavily am I going to depend on this? Am I going to use it as a guiding light, or am I going to use it as the final definition? So I believe there's probably very few companies that are making risk-based decisions like with rafts and stuff to make those risk-based decisions. And I can't emphasize risk-based decisions enough. Here again at the Space Center, when I created my program, I put, here's the rules in place. And one of the rules said, two geographically separated mission-critical systems, the connection between those two systems shall be encrypted. Well, that just makes sense. I mean, nobody would argue with that. But then I had the flight simulator on this side of the campus, and the duck pond and the mission control center over on this side of campus, and the two computers were connected, but the connection wasn't encrypted. So do I go in and try to add encryption onto it? Well, the data was flowing over a fiber optic link through a tube that was sealed with pressurized gas. No one could get to that data, microbins or anything else, to get any data out of it. So I wouldn't gather anything except some cyclic redundancy checking of integrity of the data going back and forth. So it made no sense to do that. So we've implemented our program with risk-based analysis in each step and avoided $25 million in the shuttle program.
By just asking the right questions.
Just asking the right questions and going through it. And because of that, the NASA administrator came down to Houston and gave my team a special award for continuous quality improvement for avoiding $25 million worth of cost. So we added security, and it was expensive, but not as expensive as it could have been if we'd blindly been compliant.
Yeah. So I think that just goes back to, having a lot of, not necessarily common sense, but having a level of effort applied to a situation that is beyond just the typical check boxing stuff.
Right.
Because you'll find that a lot of times there are people that will do a job and they'll do certain things just to be able to say that they've done it.
Mm-hmm.
The meaning behind it, the understanding of why they did it, doesn't necessarily exist because the incentive is to have this checkbox completed.
Right.
Right. So interesting topic that I had heard last night, and this was kind of in conversation with a few people. And I'm not going to name any names. No one's going to get in trouble for this. But
get careful how you phrase it. I might know who said it.
You might know. You might actually. Who knows? I can't confirm or deny. But the statement was, CISOs don't actually. It was CISOs use Deloitte as a CYA, right? And it was the first time I had heard that, right? Like, that's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting take. And the opinion was that because if there is an issue, you don't want it to be, I had all this set up and now we have this failure. It is, I have all this set up because industry experts, industry consultants told us what we were doing was on par for what, it was on par for the course for this. So we spent a lot of money just to make sure that what we're doing is okay. But
Right.
the other part of the conversation was a lot of the consultants haven't necessarily been on the client side. So the exposure to hands-on keyboard doesn't necessarily exist. And a lot of the technical acumen required, right, to validate the work may or may not be there. And to be clear, I've never worked with them specifically. And if they've ever done a report for someone that I know, I've never read it. So I don't have an opinion on whether that's true or not, but it came from someone that's been in the industry a lot longer than me. And what stuck out to me was the fact that people will pay millions of dollars just to point the finger at someone else. But more so, they'll do it to say, we've done this, without necessarily understanding the output of the report or the output of the engagement, but it's more so, are we okay? And it's not that it's a blind acceptance that what was listed is correct, but it's done because the market is unforgiving for people that fail, right? And when it's your job or someone else's, it's my life or yours, people will choose their own.
Right.
You'll rarely find that someone will fall on their own sword, selfishly or not, right? And what that brings me to is when it comes to a lot of the newer technologies, a lot of the AI-related things, are there people that are just checking boxes just to say that they did it without necessarily understanding that two geographically separated places should be encrypted? But in your example, when you look into it, you find out that they don't necessarily have to be. Like, does that exist today? I mean,
Absolutely, especially with all the legal stuff. First of all, do you trust your CISO and his program? That's the first question.
mm-hmm.
And then you might use Deloitte or an accounting firm to come in and do an audit so that you can say, well, we did our best and we had it checked by these people and they said we were all so good. Not necessarily something bad with that. What bothers me is when you do a poor job and then you have the audit firm come in and tell you things that you need to fix. You fix those, you spot fix those things, and you still have your blinders on. You don't care about the security program. You just care about passing their audit. Now, on the other extreme, the programs I built have been data-centric, risk-based. Like I said, subject, object, over trusted path, this kind of thing, zero trust type of technology,
Mm-hmm.
where I know why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. More than once, I've had an auditor come to me and say, you failed this audit. You are not doing this, kind of like the encryption over between the two systems. And I said, yes, you're right, we're not doing that, but we're doing these other things, like the fiber optic link, gas field tube, stuff like that. And I would show them how my system was as secure, maybe more secure and less expensive than passing their audit.
Yeah, risk-based.
Yes. So, but you have to care first. And that's one of my big issues that I get on is the executives, the CEO, do they care about the mission? Do they care about protecting the data? Like I said, the CIO that thought he could use whatever technology he wanted, he didn't care about the data. It was, I'm going to use what technology I want. I had another CIO tell me that if we get hacked, I'm just going to fire you. He didn't care about protecting the data. He was going to protect his job. And if we had an issue, the problem was he was getting rid of me. So it's the whole discussion about compliance. In my book, The Alchemy of Information Protection, I have a chart in there that I created over 15 years of how to build a security program. Starts off data-centric and taking in all your requirements and put your controls in place and the risk analysis. And And in the end, if you do that whole complete program, compliance falls out at the bottom as a byproduct.
Oh, so it's a result of this
Yeah,
process.
so compliance at the end, you're compliant because you built the right program to start with. Many companies will go in and say, well, we're PCI compliant. Okay, but what about the personal data of your customers? Well, that's not in scope of PCI in this particular area. What? So it's all your focus. Are you focused on the mission of what is the mission of the business and its data and protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability? Or are you focused on doing the mission of the business and working some level of compliance in to cover your butt?
Or you could read the book, hopefully build a practice. So it sounds like to me is, and just I'm sure you know this, right? But I am not a security expert, right? I just talk to a lot of them. And I think my favorite part about that is I get to learn a lot along the way. So when you describe the process, right, to me it sounds like the maturity of an organization. You start at the ground level and you build upon these 15, we'll say platforms or 15 levels. It's no different than a healthy diet, right? So if you're concerned with your blood glucose, right, or your LDL, HDL, right, you can't just eat whatever you want. You have to eat the right foods, right? You have to consume the right amount of nutrients. You have to exercise, and you have to, do things that are part of a healthy lifestyle. And then the result is healthy blood,
Right.
running through your body, right? You don't just say, I need healthy blood. And you can't just say, we have to be compliant.
Right.
Their compliance is the result of a healthy security system.
Yep.
Did I?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You nailed it. You can show up to the doctor once a year and get your cholesterol checked and go, oh, I passed, or oops, I failed, and continue living your life. Or you can take drugs to help it, or you can do exercise, or you can change your diet to address the problem and let the test be pass or fail at the end. Hey, I did a good job last year, or I didn't.
But what's interesting is that if for example, going to get your blood work done, if you were given a pill that fixed whatever ailment that you had, we'll say is cholesterol, you took a pill for cholesterol. And I don't know, maybe they exist. I don't know. I've never been in that position, but we'll just say for conversational purposes that it exists. You take the cholesterol pill and then you go back and you pass your cholesterol. You still have unhealthy living habits. You have unhealthy exercise habits. You have unhealthy eating habits. You haven't actually fixed the issue. You just addressed something on paper. You've essentially checked the box.
And worse than that, the pill you took may have caused other problems in your system you don't know about yet.
Yeah. So the rule here then is to do not simply do things for the sake of doing them, to cover up a mistake. If there are issues, there are probably deeper rooted issues in the overall maturity of the organization from a security perspective that should be addressed.
Right.
Because compliance is not a process. Compliance is the output of a bulletproof process. I've never heard that before. And that's why I like doing these things, right? Because so, like, for example, like Deb, Deb from ISSA, I know she does a lot of GRC work, right? And she does a lot of audits, from at least from what I understand. So her job is almost like a medical professional, where she's looking at the lifestyle of these business or these organizations and kind of giving them a pass-fail, right? But if they fail, for example, there's really not a spot check to fix it. It's what it comes down to is maybe culturally, organizationally, there is a deeper issue. that has to be addressed. And I always thought of, so to be honest with you, before we talked about this, I always viewed compliance as one of those things where it's sometimes you can do, like, if you're in school, you do an exam, or you do like a lot of mental math. So like my kids do a lot of math right now, multiplication, division. So they'll do a page of questions.
Sure.
So like 50 multiplication things, right? When it comes to checking it, I don't necessarily look at every single one. I could, but I usually spot check.
Yeah.
And the risk with that is if I looked at the wrong problem,
Right.
or if I looked at only right problems, my assumption is everything is good, right? And compliance kind of falls in the same category where you can't necessarily spot check the maturity of an organization. You can look into it, but what you find isn't indicative that a specific category or specific aspect of the business is failing. Is it just safe to say that the overall construction of the program itself has some flaws, based on what you said? Because again, compliance is not an output, right? Or compliance is not a process.
Right.
It is the output of a.
Compliance should not be the goal. Protecting your information should be the goal. Compliance should be a byproduct of doing a good job.
I like that. I do. I think it gives it a better definition as to how you actually define compliance, right?
Actually, with the programs that I've created, in one particular case, I had an auditor come in, and their report in the end was they had not seen such a mature program in all the audits that they had run. In another case, I was working for a company, a financial services company, and I created the program from scratch. We had this government agency come in and do an audit, and they were so pleased with the program that I had in place, the CEO ended up paying for my family to go to a very fancy restaurant, just saying, hey, thanks. It all pays off if you do it up front and do it right.
But
and also, by the way, if you do it right, talking about risk, a lot of people are buying risk insurance these days.
that was another topic.
Yeah.
Actually, I took a picture. We're going to talk about that, but
Okay.
Continue.
Well, I mean, if you have a good security program and you have a CISO running a good security program, you can justify your premiums going down. But where if you're just dealing with just compliance and you have a failure and the risk company comes in and says, well, you were compliant, but you missed these other things, they might not pay.
Yeah. So let me find this picture. I'm happy you mentioned that because when I saw this chart of the different categories that insurance providers look for, I was actually really interested in reading it more because I'd never seen a full list like this. Let me see, where is it at? Okay. So I'm going to read these to you, okay? And I want you to give me your take on what they are. So, required for cyber controls is what it's titled. Multi-factor authentication for remote access privilege controls, cloud-based services was top of the list. At the very bottom of the list was vendor and digital supply chain management. Did they get those two right, from top and bottom?
It depends.
Okay. Well,
It depends on the data. How important is your data that you're trying to protect?
And if the vendor supply chain management has access to that for your business.
And if that data is really important, or if it's marketing data that you have out there anyway, what difference does it make?
Yeah. So this kind of blew my mind. It's partly the reason why I took the picture, and I'm gonna get your opinion on this. It's of the 12 controls that are required by an issuing company, insurance company. Patch and vulnerability management fell at number 6.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say there's 5 other things that should be above patch and vulnerability management when you think of the fact that if you don't have a system in place for vulnerability management and patching, that you have more exposure than if you have other categories that you could be missing out on? Because, like, let's just say, for example, you're running Windows 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what you have, right? You could have the best technology in the world. The fact is you have an unpatched system. And that could, especially because, so here's the other side of that too, is if someone's running 2003, realistically they're running it because the device that it's running on is a dinosaur. And it doesn't support, from a technology perspective, it cannot support newer versions of the software. So, but the business hasn't found a way to upgrade that specific, we'll say server, in this example, we'll just call it a server running 2003. Because the server itself and the application that runs on that server hasn't been touched in 30 years.
Right.
Right? Or we'll just say 20, because 20 is probably more realistic, right? So you're running a server, you're running 2003, you have vulnerabilities, you can't patch this server because 2003 is end of life for I don't know how many years. But that was number 6. And to me,
You're not going to like my answer.
Well, why won't I like it?
Because my answer is depends. And when I say depends, I'm going to give you an example. I have a computer at home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It might be Windows 95.
No, you don't.
95, 98. Put it like this. It's not patched. It doesn't have any antivirus running on it. And I have a lot of data stored there.
No, don't admit that.
Yes, that's true.
Don't admit this.
But that computer has no connectivity to anything.
Okay.
And so I use it as my non-network storage device. It's a place where I go have an extra copy of data I want to keep around.
So it's your air-gapped system.
Yes.
Okay.
So it all depends on what your data is, how important is it, how quickly do you need to have access to it, does it need to be correct, what are the confidentiality goods. That's my concern when I see that list of things that need to be done. When you said top of the list, multi-factor authentication, why didn't they say zero trust? You could have multi-factor authentication, but what if that multi-factor authentication was being accessed by somebody in a foreign country, but they managed to get the multi-factor authentication correct? You go trust them?
Well, I'll tell you why. The vendor that was talking may or may not have been a password management system.
Okay.
So validating through some sort of multi-factor is kind of in line with what they offer.
Right.
And if you want to be number one,
I was in a company and I had someone who was going to China for vacation and they wanted to know how they could access the system while they were on vacation. I said, you don't. Leave your computer at home.
You're on vacation.
Don't take your computer to China.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to access my system from China.
Or anyone from China, right? And
Yeah.
no one.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So I don't disagree with the answer. You said I wasn't going to like it. I don't agree with that. It's not that I don't like it, but I think that's the answer that a lot of people have to hear is security is not a box that you fit into.
Right.
Right? If there's something that I took away from your answer of it depends, it means that there is not a checklist. There is not necessarily a checkbox. There is no 1 through 10 of what you need to do. None of that exists. There are things and frameworks that you should follow, but more importantly, you should adapt those to your business based on the risk that's associated with each aspect of your business.
What is your data? What is its value? Where is it? What is the threat to it? There you determine your risk and you put your controls in place based on risk.
Yeah. So based on the risk. And if, and I don't know, I think Mike said he got some of his stuff from a gentleman named Dan Schuler. But when Mike makes purchases for tech, he does it based on risk. I believe he calls it risk-based purchasing. So what he'll do is he'll look at the environment and say, where are my risks to the organization, right? Mm-hmm. And dependent on what comes back as the highest risk, he allocates the highest budget to that, solving that particular issue. So I like to think of it as, if you have a lot of credit cards that you owe a balance on, mm-hmm. you're paying down the highest interest balance first, mm-hmm. because your financial risk is that you pay more interest.
Right.
If you pay off, if you take the approach of pay off the lowest balance first, you don't ask the question of, well, what's the interest rate?
Right.
Because if the interest rate is 0, why would you pay off a 0% loan or an interest rate on a credit card?
Right.
But if you understand where you're paying the most money to carry a balance on a credit card, it makes more financial sense to pay off the highest rate of those cards.
Right.
So when you translate that to business, it's not about paying off the rate, but it's eliminating the highest risk factor of all factors. And when you pinpoint down to what is the riskiest category to this business, mm-hmm. you want to pile as much money on that as possible. Maybe throw the sink at it, because when you solve that issue, you eliminate the highest risk, right? So I don't know if you've kind of approached it that way, but when it comes to budget for when you were working, did you have the same mentality, or mm-hmm. you did?
Right, absolutely. In fact, even in my NASA document, I talk about risk and I talk about categories. That we have 3 levels of confidentiality, 3 levels of integrity, 3 levels of availability, mm-hmm. and it all depended upon how important it was, what controls I'd put in place. So that's the reason I come back to data centric. What is your data? Where is it? What is the threat to it? From there, I can determine the risks. I determine how much I want to spend on controls to protect it.
Yeah. So just looking at the situation objectively and understanding mm-hmm. where you can have the most impact.
And the problem you end up having is, but I'm this vice president. I need to have access to my data 24/7, no matter where I am. No, you don't.
Well,
it depends.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that, because I know, well, I won't say I know. I have a very strong feeling that your belief is people are the core of security.
Yes.
And when you take that into account and you have someone that says, I need this or that, like I'm going to China, I need access to my information, mm-hmm. what is presented, in my opinion, is a risk to the business.
Yes.
Because at a personal level, someone that doesn't view security of the data as a personal issue,
right,
more of a something they should be granted, maybe, mm-hmm. right, when they take it for granted,
right,
you find yourself in a potentially a position where you are at risk.
Yes.
So, like I said, very strong feeling that your thought is people are at the core of security.
I told you, that is the drum I'm beating these days in retirement. I spent half of my career being super techie. I probably at one point was committing the typical technical sin of believing that if management and everybody else get out of my way, I could solve a problem with technology. I can write code. I can repair computers. I can build computers, whatever. So yeah, at one point I was probably that much of a techie that I could just get out of my way. I'll solve the problem. Don't give me that stupid stuff. But I learned here again, people create the programs. People create the hardware. People use the hardware. People hack the hardware. It's the people aspect that brings in all the vulnerabilities. And then you have on top of that management going, oh, it's an inconvenience for me to have to do this 2-factor authentication or whatever. I'm special. I should be exempt from that. Why? Because you're special. You're not. Your data is not changing just because your position is. You need to be focused on the data and knowing that people created it. People are going to hack it. People are going to make mistakes and give away credentials.
I guess if people are the core of it, they're also the problem.
They're also the problem. And as I was saying, then what happens when you go totally AI and cut the people out of this? Will we turn our life over to the machines?
Skynet, Terminator 2.
So,
I don't know.
I've seen the movie.
That was one of my favorite movies actually growing up was, I'll Be Back. Mostly because Arnold was cool at the time.
Yeah.
And then, you kind of grow up and realize he wasn't really much of a great actor. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels like we're headed in a direction that has sunshine and rainbows, but we're also heading in a direction that might not be. And it's just dependent on how people perform and
right.
what they choose to do. It's almost like the choices they choose to make today will result in the future being, whatever that is.
One of the things that I did to help me address the people issue, I don't remember if I mentioned it when we were talking before, but I had a vice president tell me that a person was fired, programmer quit because he didn't like security. And my answer was good. Well, the right answer later was I got involved with the developers and helped them get funding for better training so they could build better products, so they could demonstrate to me that they had good security controls instead of me running vulnerability scans on them and telling them their baby was ugly. All this stuff, I engage with the company, the developers, and I engage with everybody in the company to the point where people would see me in the hallway, and instead of saying hi, they'd say, "Don't click the link." And also I had a program where if anybody had a security question or concern, they'd send it to a specific email address. And at the end of each month, I would randomly select 1, 2, whatever, based on the number of replies, of people who would get a $100 gift certificate. Just by sending an email saying, I think this is such and such. People will rat out their mother for a chance at a $100 gift certificate.
So someone ratted out their mom?
So, no, actually, I got some emails that should have gone to HR instead of me.
Really?
So, yeah, but people will do that. And if one of those emails gives me something that I can take action on and solve a problem, they get $500 gift certificate. So I had people not just running away from me, but people engaged in understanding security is a fundamental of the business. And if they are engaged in helping, they get financial reward out of it.
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that, Mike and I talked about, something that Kim and I had talked about. And my opinion is that when an incentive exists, it will create the behavior that is required.
Mm-hmm.
So you think of someone in sales. The incentive is to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to get paid, you have to sell as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So your goal is to just sell. If your incentive is to have your spouse stop yelling at you, you just do what they're asking, right? If you want to go to college, you have, in order to get in, you have to pass certain exams.
Mm-hmm.
So you study to get, the incentive of getting into college creates the behavior of studying for the SATs or the ACTs, right? So it exists everywhere in our life. But when you bring money into the equation, what you'll find is that people will do what's necessary to earn the money, right? So from the client side, like from your side, where you're incentivizing people to get paid for ratting out their mom,
Right.
that's the benefit. Now you have people that are willing to do certain things to earn $1, right? And those things are beneficial.
Earn a chance at $1.
Okay. So go into a drawing or
Right.
however it was paid out, but the opportunity was to earn, but the behavior was to submit. Okay?
Right.
That's perfect from the internal perspective
Right.
of a business being secure. Now let's take that to the other side, where when the incentive of a business is to earn money, you tend, and you mentioned it earlier, there's a possibility people will cut corners.
Mm-hmm.
And then those corners that were cut, like in the developer's case,
Right.
where the person quit because they didn't want security to be a part of it,
Right.
if you had offered money to them to say, look, you'll get paid more money if you do this faster, or you'll get paid more money if whatever outcome is desired is the result of your efforts, you'll get that. You'll find that people will go that route. But
That's what I ended up doing in the end. I paid to have them get the training so they could produce better stuff, so they could be seen more in a positive light, doing the right thing.
so you're paying on two sides now. You're paying internally for people to recognize the risks that are associated with whatever situation. But
And what's the difference between paying that and paying you to recommend a friend for a job?
nah, not much.
But on the other side here, the negative side here is, what do you do with the person that gave up their ID and password that allowed your system to be hacked, and you have a major problem? Do you fire that person? Well, that's an interesting question there. Now, something else I did as far as metrics go, I would use these programs, know before others, to run monthly tests, quizzes and stuff. And the results I would get back, I shared not the names, but the numbers with the executives.
Okay.
So with the executive team, I'd share with all the executives across the board. And actually, 1 month, legal came out with the worst score, and the general counsel took control of that, and that didn't happen again. Because executives like to compete too. So I'm not going to take a chance on my team being the team that doesn't understand what's going on.
Especially legal. I mean, because those are the ones that, they mess up and it's bad. Like if they write a bad contract, if they don't account for certain risk, then business is at risk, right?
And I mentioned legal, and as soon as I said legal, we talked about compliance a few minutes ago. If your company is focused on compliance, you don't need a CISO. You just let legal just take, do the stamping of what's compliant, and it's either compliant or it's not compliant. It's either legal or it's illegal, and you just go about it. You don't worry about it.
Yeah. So what I'll say from that is security is more so a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mindset.
It is.
Right. But it's a mindset that even has taken 60 years for people to ingrain. But the craziest part about all that is the only people that really care are the ones that have their money on the line.
Right.
Because nowadays you'll see a lot of newer companies that are backed, VC backed. They will have certain requirements for security maturity for these organizations. So if there is someone investing their money, they want to know that from a security liability perspective, their money is safe. Not that it's not that they're putting it in a bank, for example, but if they're investing it, they want to make sure that the people that they're investing it with have security first mindset. But
mindset's very true. Here again, when I was at NASA, I mentioned that I avoided $25 billion in risk. Mm-hmm. Well, some of the shuttle missions were classified, secret. They wouldn't even tell you the date and time of a launch. Okay, 24 hours before launch, the parking lot of Building 30 filled up. So one could kind of guess the date and time of the launch, but they were running secret information, secret missions. And after I did this risk program. They got me into a room, bunch of colonels, and they said, okay, tell us about this risk program you have. If we say our data is pink, not really red, secret, how can you protect it? And we were talking about the space station. And I said, well, we're going to encrypt the link from here to the space station. They're going, yeah, that's good. I said, but on board the space station, the chip that does the encryption and decryption, we're not going to put shielding around it to prevent data from breaking out into the environment, because the way we look at it, anybody that goes to all the expense and effort to get the right equipment up there close enough to that chip to gather any intelligence off that chip deserves something for their effort.
Let them have it.
So I said, we don't need the extra weight in the space station, and it'd just be too awkward for them to get the right stuff up there to get any information off of it. So that was, the Air Force was looking at not risk-based, they were looking at threat elimination. If I think that you're going to attack me, I'll just kill you.
But now let's translate that to business, right? So risk-based is one part of it. So is your opinion then that threat-based is the counterpart to that?
No, threat is before risk. What is your data? Where is it? What is your data? How important is it to you? What is the risk of? What is the financial impact if it's compromised? If it's altered? If it's not there when you need it? What is that data? Where is it? Now that you know your data and its value, what is the threat to it? That threat times your value gives you your risk factor.
Oh, okay.
So you get risk is determined from the value of the data and the threat to it. If you have something that's very valuable and has no threat to it, there's no risk.
Okay, so you when you look at your overall risk, you have almost like a weighted scale where, depending on the value of the data, right? Because the data is the asset, right?
Yes.
So dependent on the value of the jewels,
Right.
Whether they're diamonds or cubic, right? You know, if they're diamonds, you protect them. If they're, we'll say emerald, maybe. I don't even know what a cheap stone would be. We'll just say a rock. You have jewels, you have a diamond, and you have a rock. And then depending on the value of those, right? If you don't care about the value of the rock, then who cares about the threat to the rock?
You don't have a lot of foot traffic in this area where we're at right now.
No.
As you go home tonight, go outside and just put a penny on the ground and see if it's there the next day or two when you come back. Okay. Now, if I said the same thing about put a $100 bill there, you're thinking, well, I'm going to at least hide the $100 bill under a rock.
Honestly, I wouldn't. So I'm going to tell you what my first thought is. I wouldn't hide the $100 bill under a rock. I would put the rock on it so it doesn't blow away. So when I come back, it's more likely still there, because you're right. There's not much traffic.
So the threat there again. The threat of paper blowing versus the threat of penny blowing. That's a different scenario. I was thinking about somebody taking it from you.
Yeah. No, someone would for sure take a $100 bill, and if it was one of my kids, they would for sure pick up the penny, right? But my kids don't really come around here.
And what would be the financial loss to you if you lost a penny versus losing a $100 bill?
Yeah, it'd be a lot different. I mean, it's a lot of pennies to make a $100 bill, you know? I guess, you know, it's from an outsider's perspective, like I said, not necessarily a security expert, but more so just someone in the space. In tech, we'll just say that. I really like getting the different perspective from people, because I never really thought about how do you, if I were to put something outside, whether it's a penny or $100 bill, right? But when it comes to money, like there are certain things that I would for sure do. So the parallel that I draw in my head is, should security experts look at data as their own money? Because
it's not theirs.
Well,
it's the business.
But okay, so I agree with you. It's not their data.
It's like the CFO really The CFO defines the policies for managing the money for the entire company, and each department has a budget. The CFO defines the rules for how you manage your budget, but you manage your own budget.
Yeah. No, I get that part, but I think maybe the thought that I was leaning into was so we'll go back to you. So if you were to have $100 in your bank account or $100,000 in your bank account, right? That's just the baseline, right? Now, if I told you that your password to log into your online banking could easily be hacked, you're more likely to change it or address it if you know that I could access that account and take the 100,000.
Right.
Right. Now, if you had two bank accounts where one had 100 and then one had everything else, and the password was, could be, broken, and someone could break into the $100 account, you'd probably still change your password, but the motivation wouldn't be as much as if you knew for the 100,000, right?
Absolutely.
So just general human perspective, like the way people operate. So my thought was, if you look at your data as your own money, like if the value of the data to the business is so many hundreds of millions of dollars, and you look at it as this is my money versus it's their money and I'm just here to do a job, I think people would approach it differently, because if it's your money, it means a lot more to you. But you'll often find that people, might work at a company where they say, oh, it's not my money, I don't really care, right? Be like when they buy stuff. Like if you're in the purchasing department, they say, hey, I need to save as much as possible because the incentive for the behavior they want is to save the money. Whereas if you go to maybe like marketing, their goal is to have the best product out, right? But it's not their money. But they have budget. So as long as I stay within budget, I want to buy the best tools for my team to create the best marketing campaigns to get the most customers for the ROI. Okay. So now when it comes to data and security, if people looked at the data as valuable to the business at whatever dollar amount, and they said, if this was my personal bank account, what would I do differently to keep it safe? Do you think that people or places would be more secure because now they're looking at it from the optics of this is mine and I have to protect it? Or does that not really matter? Because to me, if you said, hey, protect this data, however you can, cool. Protect this data, and if for whatever reason we get hacked, you lose all of your life savings, you lose everything that you've earned in your entire life, I can guarantee you there would be two different mindsets for me as a person. But you don't really see that in business where people look at the data as theirs. It's not my personal data, right? It's not mine. It's my business's data. So like, should there be a shift in mindset of people in the security industry to take it more personal?
You just defined my risk acceptance process.
I did.
You did, because that's what I do. I get with executives, get them to understand it's their data. It's their data. If this data is attacked, it's just like their budget. If they blow their budget, they have to go to the CFO. They're going to deal with that wrath. If their data gets hacked, and I've told them that this was at risk, it's their data they let get hacked. That's been the big paradigm that I've seen shift. In fact, as each time we would get a new executive, I'd have a meeting with that executive, and we would have the understanding of what their job was. And it's great for the executive to tell me how important they are, and then we'll talk about how important their data is. And we'll get them to understand it's their data. So that way, when decisions are made, they're blowing their data, they're blowing their budget, it's theirs. I'm an advisor to them.
Okay. Is that why you were smiling when I was explaining it? Because you were kind of, I connected the dots without realizing it?
Yeah.
How many people do you know of because I'm pretty sure most people, if two random people, not necessarily random, but two people randomly selected, kind of know you as the godfather, right, out here for security, how many people would you say take the same approach of the RAF, like the risk acceptance form?
I have no, I just know that a lot of the companies where I've been and where people who have worked with me are now, the process has, it's like, for example, Kim and I are just co-mentors to each other, and he's adopted it. But then it's not just for me, but there's a FAIR process, factor analysis for information risk process out there. There's a book called FAIR that talks about how do you identify the value and the risk, and so you can prioritize this. So it's not all just my idea for the RAF form. The RAF form is mine, but educating the executive that it's theirs was the key to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because that's where I had before. I would say, well, you can't do that. Well, why? It's just the company's data. No, it's not the company's data. It's your data. This is the impact to you.
So that kind of just leans into the fact that you have to be responsible for what your domain is.
Right.
So
they have their people, they have their budget, they have their data.
I don't think most people look at it that way. I don't think most people would say data is part of, what I'm responsible for. Like, I don't think the marketing team necessarily thinks of it's our data. They think of we need that to be able to do our job, but they don't necessarily think of it as this is our data and we have to secure it.
Funny you should mention that. There's one company I was hired in, and it was within the first 2 weeks I was on board. And the marketing team wanted to take the data and send it to this other company to do some marketing stuff for them.
Like
the operational data, they wanted to send it, and IT said, well, we can't parse out just that data. We have to give them a copy of the whole database.
Why?
Well, and I said, no, you need to find a way. And they said, no, we can't do it. We have to give them the whole database or nothing. So I had a meeting with IT and marketing and operations. It was operations data. And after we discussed what the data was and who owned it, it was operations that said, no, this isn't going to happen.
No. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to. I could see how in some cases you might need that. So, like, for example, like with video, if you have like this recording, we'll say it's an hour long, right? It's over an hour, but if we have an hour recording and I need editing work done, specialty work done,
right?
It's really hard to send if I have a full clip, I usually have to send the full clip. And I can take a small part of it, but I have to then export that piece and then send it, right? But in most cases, the teams need the full clip, right? So I could see, like, in some cases where having the full set of information is useful, but there's still a way to export the small piece. It's a lot more work to do that, but you can still get it done. So how many places have you worked at where culturally, when you came in, they didn't have a mature program?
Well, I created the program for mission operations at Johnson Space Center. I created the program for the Attorney General in Texas.
Okay.
I didn't create I was hired away from the Attorney General to go to Dell. I didn't create the program there, but I significantly impacted the program at Dell. And then I went to operations and then into engineering. I created the program for early warning services, the program for American Traffic Solutions, the red light people.
ATS?
ATS.
Okay.
And then I created the program at Cable One. They in the last two cases, they had something of a program in place, or they had somebody who that was looking after security. But like when I got to Cable One, it was being done by the network guys, and the network guys were just the Department of No, and everybody in the company hated the network guys.
Do they still hate them?
No.
Okay.
In fact, I came in, and then, as it turns out, the network guys were reorged under me, and we put in a program, and people started understanding whose data it was and what was going on, and it changed the entire complexion of the company.
Cable One's the internet provider, though, right? where are they? I know they're based out of here, but where is their like typical patch of clients? Is it in Arizona or is it in?
Well, they have some in like southern Arizona, northern Arizona. They have Boise, Idaho. I can't remember all the places, but it's more rural.
Okay.
So
that to me is kind of sticks out because it goes back to the fact that when consumers buy products from large organizations, they expect a certain level of, we'll say proficiency might be the word, maybe maturity.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned how earlier Microsoft is too big to fail. So I think people unknowingly just assume certain things. I mean, right or wrong, it doesn't matter.
Right.
I'm sure Microsoft is doing a lot better than most places from a security perspective, but the default thought is they are doing it better than I ever could, or than a company that, this other company would, because they're so big, they're so large, right? But when you come in and, like you said, culturally they weren't where they needed to be, to me the first thing I think of is like how many other organizations are famous, well-known brands that are just struggling today from a security perspective?
Well, I will tell you that a friend of mine that he in the last year he got in touch with me and told me that here's the problems he's having, and the problem was they looked at the CISO as owning the data. It was his job to protect the data. They didn't have departments owning it and taking risk. So it's common out there to just look to the security guy. It's his problem.
Yeah. Well, that's like what happened, today with CrowdStrike.
Yep.
There's I talked to Mike earlier, and he said he was up for 30 hours.
Yep.
He hasn't slept in 30 hours. So meanwhile, there's a lot of people out there saying, well, you shouldn't have had their stuff, or pointing fingers. There are people that haven't slept for more than a full for a full day, a day and a quarter, and he's still going to be up. He's probably up right now, right? So we'll just assume he hasn't slept in 36 hours by the time they may not even have it all done. I talked to one of their guys earlier, and a small percentage of the overall footprint has been addressed.
Right.
Because the issue exists at the device level, which requires someone to actually physically dial into it, right? Or physically be present to do a lot of this stuff. But people just look to those in security to say, it's broken, fix it, right? Or when I pick up my phone and it doesn't work, you blame the network.
Right.
Right? When you try and do your password and you can't get it right, you blame the computer. Right? It's no one ever necessarily takes their own responsibility or holds themselves accountable for not remembering their password.
Right.
They just call the help desk and say, help me fix this because I don't know it. It's never, hey, I'm sorry to be the person to do this, but can you help me because I forgot? It's always, you need to do this. So I kind of feel like a lot of times people in tech, specifically on the client side, on the network, infrastructure, security, tend to always be, Andy had a really good story. He called it the guy in France that would always walk up to a water fountain every day, take a cup of water, drink it, and then move on, right? And then one day they said, why do we even have this guy here? So they fired him. And then what ended up happening is 3 weeks later, the water was bad. And no one knew the reason. And the reality was they realized that the guy that was going and drinking the water was just testing it and making sure that everything was good. So it's always, when everything's fine, people say, what do we need you for? But when it's bad, point the finger.
When I was a technician, a phrase that I remember is, because I built my own TV, and anyway, so if you fix someone's TV, color TV, it'll never be quite as good as it was before it broke.
Really? That's a lie.
Well, it used to be. I mean, nowadays with digital, everything it works or doesn't work. But in the old days, early days of color, the screen painting itself. No, well, that color it used to be more blue. So,
Yeah, that's to me that seems ridiculous, but I don't think anything's changed, from the diode TVs till now, right? Or what not the diode, the bulbs, right? The little gas things when you had them in the TV. I think what it comes down to is people just are less likely to be responsible and accountable for their.
you got it right. That's what I was getting at. It's like you can fix their TV, but then it's still not, not as good as it was before.
It was never. It's never what it was. But
Yeah.
well, how did the TV break?
Yeah.
You punched it because your football team lost on the weekend, right? It's like, oh no, that's beside the fact. But then again, we just circle back to people.
Mm-hmm.
So like, no matter what we do, we always come back to the person.
Right.
And kind of what I'm hearing from you is something very similar that I heard from Kim is that it starts with us.
Right.
As people. You have to be, we'll say, vigilant, right? You have to be responsible, right? You have to, in the event of a failure, you have to, hold yourself accountable,
Right.
and take the necessary steps to avoid that issue.
That's the reason I ended up minoring in psychology in my first degree. Actually, I was a sergeant in the Army in Europe, and I had 5 guys work for me. And one guy I had to look at, I watch him closely every day when he showed up to work to find out which guy I was getting, depending upon how he woke up. And another guy would follow the first guy's lead. Another guy would always do whatever I said. Another guy would always say no first, but then I explained why I needed it done, and he'd willingly go do it. So I from that's what I ended up minoring in psychology, because I knew to get something done, I had to work through these people.
Yeah, but how do you? Not everyone in security has the same training, right?
Which is why I'm saying the CISO needs to remember that he's dealing with people. Back to my thing with the programmer who quit because of security versus the programmer who's still on the job because he's making better things that he's very proud of that are really secure because I helped him. I motivated him to do it the right way.
Yeah. So there's I know I keep drawing inspiration from prior episodes, but that's I guess part of the learning process is so Kim had let me know that there was a study done, and I recently went back to look at his recording, but he didn't name the study. But what they found in this study specifically was that there was a ratio of praise to criticism, and if the number, I think the exact number was 5.6, but we'll just say 6 to 1. So for every 6 compliments, there was 1, say, criticism. And in organizations that had a ratio of that or higher, they found that they were more on the like bleeding edge or like the more progressive type of an organization. And it ties back to what you're saying, because when you understand the people, you realize that people would much rather be praised than criticized. So as a leader, by taking the praise approach first, maybe followed by criticism, what you'll find is that the more you praise with some criticism, the more likely you are to have people that are motivated to do the things that you want. Now, you went to school to figure that out, right? So you found that out.
Well, that school and also in the Army, leadership was an important thing I learned in the Army.
Yeah.
Field Manual 100, FM 100, leadership.
Oh, there's an actual manual.
Oh, absolutely. There's 4 indicators of leadership. There's 11 leadership principles. So, yeah.
So, okay. Yeah, I've never served, so I'm not familiar with these documents or the books for that matter. But it is interesting to see that there are a lot of parallels between the guests that have come in, right? Granted, you kind of helped a lot of them along the way. You can't be the godfather of security without interacting with a lot of these people.
I had a guy at Dell that was given to me. I was his 5th manager in a year.
Oh, okay. So one every 2 months, basically.
He was a problem child. And he worked for me for about 2 weeks. And we sat down and I said, look, you got 2 weeks vacation. This is the job I need you to do. You need to take your vacation and go home and think about if this is the job you want to do, and if not, what is your job you want to do, and then we'll talk about how we're going to work this out here. And he came back and we worked something out, and he ended up working very good for me, and I ended up getting a good review, and he ended up getting into the part of the business he wanted to be in. Now, so you need to have the boundaries, you need to have the praise, both, but you can't forget the stick. Okay, this is not a good example, but when I was a sergeant in the Army, I was in Berlin, and I was in charge of the computer system that ran the entire building. It was on the second floor, and people on my team had to have special training to be on my team. And I had this PFC, he was smart, but he was just flat lazy. He just wouldn't do hardly anything. Well, the building was a 3-story building. He and I went up to, the maintenance for the rest of the building was done by the maintenance team on the first floor. So this guy, he and I went up to the top, on the top of the floor, to the top, on the roof, and we walked over to the side of the building and looked 3 stories down. And we discussed the fact how important it was, what he did on our team, how our team was special, how the team down on the first floor was just a bunch of technicians, and how he could, and then we talked about his continued existence on my team. Now, I don't know if he took that as the fact that he could possibly fall from here, or that he could end up down on the first floor maintenance team, but he was good as gold for me until I left. But I understand after I left, he went back to being his old self.
No. So
but he just needed to have his boundaries reset.
Yeah, the stick left. So yeah, the mouse. Well, the cat's away, mice play. Right. My biggest, I guess, question when it comes to all of this is like, people in security, right, tend to come up in security. And it's great to have this background of psychology and the service background, right, instill certain principles. But a lot of times, especially now, because security is much more evolved now than it was when you first started, a lot of people in security start at the analyst and engineer role.
Right.
And you and I both know that not all engineers have a high emotional intelligence.
Right.
And in an environment that is lacking representation from women, right? From tech in general, right? I think security, from what I've seen, has a lot more representation than just networking and like the other areas of technology. But overall, there's just less emotional intelligence as a whole, right? And maybe that's a blanket statement, but I believe there's some truth to it. And as you nod your head, I kind of feel like I'm at least not like stepping in it, right?
No, you're
so the emotional intelligence part is low. So then the issue that I see that presents itself is one where someone with a low emotional intelligence comes up through the ranks. And by coming up through the ranks, there's a lower likelihood that they lead the same way someone that has a psychology background does. And then you essentially create an environment that is lacking that emotional intelligence, right? And most of the people that have come in here, I would argue, have a high emotional intelligence, right? Like Mike and Kim and Lester, right? But I think now, when you look at the number of people that are trying to get in security, a lot of them start at the engineering level or the analyst role, but they want to go into the engineering part, right? You don't necessarily get into a director of security by transitioning from director of technology.
right.
Right, and it happens, and it in fact happened in Lester's case. So Lester was part of the information technology team, and then transitioned to security.
But he started out as a musician.
Yes, he started out as a clarinet player, and then he realized that he hated kids,
Right.
and so he never did it. At least that, that's part of the conversation that we had. So exactly. So there's a high probability that today, in 20 years from now, a lot of people in management will have come up through the ranks in security, and they will have come up from a position that does not have an emphasis on emotional intelligence. And the result of that is you might find a lot of companies in the future are lacking that. And based on all the conversations that I've had with you, with Kim, with Mike, when that doesn't exist at the leadership level, you find that the organization kind of falls apart, right? So all that to say, my question at the end of my thought is, in 20 years, if that's the case where engineers come up, how do you create an environment as an organization to where the principles that you've kind of formulated over the years and the people that you've helped, how do you make that an indelible mark going forward so that the people that come up have some way to understand it and learn it without forgetting it, and then finding ourselves in a position where the practice is falling apart at an emotional intelligence level? Like, I think that's a tough question.
The first thought is that is the reason why mentoring is so important. Regretfully, all too many people these days think that they can scratch and claw their way to the top and to hell with anybody else, and there's no emotional intelligence involved there. Whereas those who are smart enough, they reach out and have a mentor, and they bounce ideas off them and talk about what if, well, what do I do about this, and they learn from their mentor. And this is a key function or key mission of the current ISSA, is mentoring this year. And speaking of ISSA, I was the 8th international president of ISSA, and when I became the 8th international president, I was the 4th male international president.
Really?
Yeah. But in 1992, I remember we had a conference in Houston, and of all the people that attended, I think there were probably 6 or 8 females. So you're right. The ISSA has been really good at the leadership level, but bringing females in is the thing to do. We need to have a diverse environment. We need to be able to see things different ways to solve problems. The hackers certainly see things different ways than the programmers saw them. Mm-hmm. So I'm strong on mentoring.
I would probably be now the first to admit that there are probably things that I've said, here's a really good example. There are, I'm sure, and I've seen examples of this for me personally, right? And this is how I can say this, is when I was in my 20s, there were things that I've said that I look back and it's just like, I can't believe I was that dumb, right? And I think as a person, I've grown, right, from, we'll say 20 to, early or late 30s. And you see these things, or, your phone tells you about memories that you have, and there might be a clip or there might be a statement, and it's just like, man, how did people like me back then, right? Yeah. And I've had that, right? And it's like, man, I actually said that. And
we've all said stupid things.
We have, but you learn from them. Hopefully, if you look back 10 years in your life, not that you're disgusted, but that you might be a small bit of ashamed.
Yep.
And I think if you can say that, mm-hmm. you're in a better position today than you were then, right? And that's kind of, I guess, part of growing, is you learn that the version of you that existed 10 years, 20, 30 years ago isn't who you are today, and that you're a better person as a result of the experiences that you've had. And I hope that, when my daughters get to the point where they're looking for work and, that people don't say the things that they say today. And I hope that, the country that they live in isn't one that is as hurtful as it can be at times today. But that just goes back to just people being willing to listen, people being willing to learn, because the person that isn't willing to do that will probably never improve.
Well, I hope they grow up that they're strong enough and capable enough that if they find themselves working for somebody who is unworthy of them working for, they can quit and go and let that bad person go their way. So,
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
And if not, I hope that things are for me in a position where I can just help them. It's
Dad
like,
wants to come in.
let me help you, find a new thing or help you with this or that. But I guess it is what it is today, and the only thing we can really do is just hope to make it better.
Yeah.
Hope to improve it. But I guess I don't necessarily want to just like beat that drum for too long, because what I hope is with the lady that comes in here, we can talk about that a lot more, right? Because I have a feeling it exists more than I'm aware, because I'm a male, right? But I hope to get her perspective, and I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Kind of what I want to focus on too now is, I know you brought a couple documents, a couple books, right? We haven't really talked about them. I know you specifically said you wanted to talk about this pink book.
Yes, this is the Automated Information System Security Manual. We called it computer security back in the day.
Okay.
This is October 1990, and the signature at the bottom is Gene Kranz. So this is the document I created for Mission Operations at Johnson Space Center. Like I said, it was based on the Rainbow series, Orange Book and the others. Orange Book came out in December of 1986. This book became known as the Pink Book throughout NASA. So like I said, it's one of the first programs where it documented security as depending upon confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Dated 1990, by the way.
Yes.
So what is that, like 34 years ago? Yeah, 34. So 34 years ago, that book was signed.
Yes.
Which has me worried, because that means before then, that book didn't exist.
You mean people writing their passwords on whiteboards? No.
Well, obviously that still happens today, but now instead of a whiteboard, it's a Post-it. What is concerning might be the wrong word, but it might be along the lines of what I'm thinking, is that book was essentially signed and coined, right, printed in 1990. So my first question is, what was going on before then? So for example, you think of dinosaurs, right? Mm-hmm. Before that era, what was going on? And you only know by looking at like the historic levels in the dirt, right? In the crust, if you will, of the earth. I think my curiosity is, because this wasn't before I was born. I'm not that young, but it was before a time where I understood what security was. And as a younger person in technology, I would be curious on how would you characterize the 70s, the 60s and 70s compared to the 2020s, right? Because you've been through both, right? So the first thing that comes to my mind when I say that is like concerts. And like, so you go to a concert today, you can go to a Taylor Swift concert, and it could be in like this largest arena and hundreds of thousands of fans, if that's even the number that these arenas hold. But we'll just say 40,000 people, right? That's nowadays.
Okay.
But then you think of Woodstock.
Yeah.
It's a totally different experience, right?
Yes.
So today is one thing, right? What was like the Woodstock of security in the 60s and 70s?
Well, first of all, wasn't old enough to have attended Woodstock. I was still probably too young to be out there in the fields of New York.
Well, I was just thinking,
But I did attend the first concert by the Beatles in the United States.
You did?
Yes.
So you saw. So did you see it when they had the original members and before they kicked the one guy? Or no, I think he actually died.
What, you talking about replacing Ringo?
Yeah.
No, the one that had Ringo in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first concert here, United States, Shea Stadium, New York.
So you went to the first Beatles concert.
Yeah. So that later, I haven't been to a concert in many years, but the thought of paying $3,000 for a concert ticket blows my mind.
Wait, back then it was $3,000?
No, now.
Oh, okay.
So it's like I got on a bus with my cousin, and we rode from the mountains of Virginia up to New York on a bus to go see the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
That was let me tell you, life at that time was when you went to the bank, you took your passbook with you to put money in or take money out of your savings. You walked into a bank. You didn't have a phone. You didn't have a credit card number. We didn't have credit cards back then. So life was a whole lot. In fact, like I said, I grew up in the mountains of Virginia, and the back door was always unlocked. The front door, if you go around to the front door, the key was up in the light fixture.
You wouldn't do that today, though, would you?
No, nobody would do that today. So it was a different lifestyle, different. We had different data that we were using. It was different places. It was protected different ways. Your money was in the bank, or it was in a sock under your bed. There wasn't the internet. Actually, the first time I got on the internet was when I was working for NSA in England. And so that was in the 80s. So right soon after Al Gore invented it. But anyway, so life was totally different. It was more community. It was more friendly. In fact, when I grew up, it was we the people. It was just the community. We were all together. We were all doing the same thing. When I was in the Army, we were all crawled through the same mud together, was a phrase in the Army. So things have become more polarizing these days. So, and I find the same things with security. It's like in 1980, here was an example about people. I was running a shift there on the team supporting NSA, and there was one group of technicians that would find out information on how to fix things, and they would keep it secret to themselves. And actually, they would store it in the Unix computer, and they would store it in encrypted files in Unix computers so nobody else could get it unless you were part of their club.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the funny thing was, this group over here wanted that information, weren't in the club. So the guys that didn't have access pulled up the encrypted files using any password, which means they didn't get the good information, and then they encrypted it again with another word. So it means the original file, when the guys that were trying to keep secrets, when they pulled it up, they got garbage. Mm-hmm. They got unencrypted, re-encrypted garbage. So that kind of attacking each other is so unproductive. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent on that.
No, I think the frustration comes from the experience of, at a time when you were early in the career, there was more acceptance, there was more people willing to work with one another, and over time, it's maybe gotten a little bit harder to get things done.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think there's anything wrong with, like you said, hopping on a tangent, because I think it just shows that there are issues that exist today
Yeah.
that haven't necessarily been addressed, but they exist.
Yeah.
And it's no different than having, to tie it back to security, it's no different than having a vulnerability that has been there for a while that just needs to get a patch. It's there. We know it's there. You just have to fix it, right? And the sense of community doesn't necessarily exist between a lot of people. And I would say my opinion is that it doesn't exist because the leadership style of companies today doesn't necessarily contribute to the overall goal of the people.
Right.
It's contributed to the goal of the organization. But from the leadership role, it's attributed to the goal of the financials, right? And I think Kim had mentioned it, where there was a big culture shift with Jack Welch, with GM, and the way that he approached business, and the downstream effects that it's had in later years.
Yep.
And funny enough, when you talk about the years where things were better, that was pre-GM, right? Pre-Jack Welch.
Yep.
So interestingly, in a time where Welch came along and had his policies and practices that have kind of, spread out throughout multiple organizations culturally, and obviously still exist today, and it's easy to see where they exist. It's you find out that there were other incentives besides the people. And now the world that we live in is revolved around the dollar versus the people. It's less of a, companies will say we're a family, but the people that work there don't feel that way.
Yeah.
And they definitely don't feel that way when they get laid off and they get their paperwork with the severance.
Right.
But, I think that's just something that I can't solve.
It's what I was saying before about the developer versus security. Instead of there being the struggle there, there needs to be a come together, a common understanding of what the major overall objective is. How can we help each other meet that objective?
But it's tied back to the people again. So I think the overall theme that I'm getting from you is that the common denominator is the person. Right. And how that person operates and how they proceed in their career determines the output of the company that they exist in.
Yep.
Right. It's kind of sad, if I'm going to be honest, because there are a lot of selfish people out there.
Yep.
I'm one of them, right?
Yeah.
I can admit that there are a lot of things that I do that my wife is not happy with, right? She has good reason to feel this way, right? And there have been times where I've put work before kids, I've put work before family, and it's something that I have to deal with, right? And it's something that I have to, we'll say, live with, because
sometimes it's the right thing to do, but sometimes it can be excessive. So you have to figure out the balance.
But let me tell you why it happened. It was because of the money. Right? Because of the money. I consistently found myself in positions where the money was more important than other things. And even to this day it happens, even though I know it's a problem.
Just retire. You don't have that problem. You just don't have money.
Yeah, you just retire and you don't have to deal with it. Well, I'm not at the point yet, but it would be nice to do that. That's like the kill switch, right? Just retire, and then you have all the time in the world.
But no money.
Yeah, but the problem with that is I can't. So now we're back to how do you navigate that?
Right.
But the one thing that I have learned along the way is that it is a problem, right? It's not fully solved, but it's gotten better. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for me personally. And, I think, the biggest thing that I have learned along the way is that it is a problem, right? It's not fully solved, but it's gotten better. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for me personally. And, I think, the biggest thing that I have learned along the way is that it is a problem, right? It's not fully solved, but it's gotten better. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for me personally. when we talk about these stories, I can see myself in a role where people make decisions selfishly, right?
Yep.
And I think in a lot of ways, if I was in a role, I might even contribute to the problem that exists, where it's self over people, right? And it's probably terrible to say, especially on camera, but I think recognizing that is maybe the first part about it to changing it. But how many people are actually doing that is the other thing.
Yeah.
Right. So good thing I'm not in leadership for security or tech for that matter, but
Might surprise you.
I might.
You might surprise yourself.
I hope I can. I think, what do they say? Acceptance is the first step to recovery or something like that. And maybe that's where I'm at. Or maybe I'm at the tail end of it. But there's just so much that goes on in business, and there's just so much that happens that people aren't aware of. But there's also a lot of it is a result of humans, people, and their interactions.
People. Let's go back to people.
Yeah.
People are all individuals, and they all have their own paradigm for their existence. And the key to leadership is getting everybody to see and pull in the same direction.
But it's hard
Yep.
when there's money involved.
Even if there's not money involved, it's hard.
Yeah, but money makes it.
Yep.
Money puts the blinders on a lot deeper, right? So maybe before money, you're kind of like this with the blinders out, just where you can kind of see.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what this is, but it's probably like 160
Money's an
degrees.
accelerator.
Yeah, the minute the money comes on, it's just tunnel vision. So I know we've talked about the people, we've talked about kind of like the early days, we kind of talked about things now, and we always keep coming back to the people, right? And one thing that I think about is the people today are different than the people that have been in the industry for 30, 40 years, right? So there is a large gap in information that exists between the people coming into the world today versus the people that have been around for 30 years. And I'll give you an example, maybe more so just like a quick story on maybe the point that I'm trying to make is nowadays when you want to save a file, you click the save button, right? Control S. Or if the application has the save function, what are you clicking on? You're clicking on a picture of a floppy disk. The little floppy disk with the little metal piece that you kind of pull and snap back, right? There are kids today that don't know what that is, right?
Do they need to?
I don't know, right? I guess we'll take one out of your book and say it depends.
Yeah, it depends.
It depends.
And here again, that I was fortunate in growing up that I understood computers, transistor to transistor, subject to object, all the internal workings, machine programming, and how it all works on the inside. And to me, that's helped me build my foundation where I look at AI and go, oh, this is my concern. Is there some crap in there that I don't know is good and I can't verify it? But there are people coming into the world, into the technology today that wouldn't know a NAND gate from an AND gate, wouldn't know a chip from a whole computer. All the foundation that I've grown up with to get where I am, do they need to? But they need to have a certain level of understanding that I'm not sure they do have in there to understand artificial intelligence. That's where my concern is. How much of the history, the details that I had, do they really need to have? But I know they need to have more of a foundation, subject, object, zero trust, understanding that to understand how they can use these tools.
Okay, I could see that. I could see how, like if we correlate it to war, World War II was a lot different than Desert Storm.
Yes.
Right. But knowing how, or the Vietnam War, right? Knowing how to fight in the jungle against, the Viet Cong might be a valuable skill if there was another war
Right.
in that area, right? But nowadays, war probably isn't like that. It might be, but it's less likely to be. It's more likely that missiles will fly, buildings will tumble, and someone will throw in a white flag.
After the infrastructure that we all depend on has been shut down.
Yeah. So digitally, that'd be done.
Yeah.
Right? So I can see how you said, does it matter? And it probably doesn't, because if you knew how to fight in trenches, from World War I, like if you were in the trenches where it's muddy, I could see how having those skills is important then. Knowing how to run, duck, hide, and all the other stuff, like say in the no man's land between the two fronts, you don't necessarily need that in 2024.
Good
But-
example for you is if I was at home and the power grid was shut down because we're at war, I have solar. And my solar is on the grid. But I have the background and knowledge where I know how I could go out to the power box and I could cut this lock off, and how I could remove myself from the grid and at least still be able to use the solar that's on my house.
Okay. Oh, so you're saying more, not necessarily how to have the solar there, but how to manipulate it to get the outcome that you want.
Right. So in other words, even though the whole valley is shut down, I can remove myself from the valley, and the solar energy I'm getting from my panels, I can keep my refrigerator running.
That'd be good.
So that is a basic level of understanding I'm glad I have, but I don't know that all solar customers would know how to do that.
No.
They would simply have their solar panel still trying to pump onto this grid that's not producing anything.
Mm-hmm. So your position is more so that it's not about the experiences; it's more about the ability to, how do I want to say it? The ability to be resourceful with what you do know,
Right.
to get the outcome you want versus having been a part of it.
How do you know that AI program is good?
I guess you just have to ask the right questions.
Have to ask, I would like to see a program, but it's so funny, I'm going to say this. I would like to see a program that could analyze an AI program and tell you if it's good. But how could I trust that the first program that I'm using to analyze your program, if it's good, how do I know that program's good to start with?
Yes, you don't. It's just the dilemma that we're in.
Right. And then if the engines are good, then we're back to the data. Where are you getting your data from? What are you doing with your data?
Yeah. Well, where does it go then? Like, so I'm sure for you, like, clearly you have a lot of concerns, right, with how the technology is being used, who's using it, who has their hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
You have concerns on the data that goes into it, the potential bias that could reside
Right.
as a result of the data or as a result of the programmer. All that aside, like, where do you see the biggest risk outside of all that? Like, where do you see the downstream effects? Where do all these bad things kind of come together and create a bigger problem?
I don't even know that I can go there. I don't even know how I could define that. I do have a hobby of parapsychology, and I've read a lot of books, polar shifts, earth changes, all kinds of things that could go wrong. So to me, I'm back to people again. How can I be a good person? How can I be good to the people around me? How can I help people be good people? To me, that's survival.
So at the core of it, people just need to be good. And if you're good, if everyone's good, the community's good.
I would like to believe that, but I've thought about what would happen in my community if everything went to hell. How could we come together? How could we trust each other? How could we shed some of this evil stuff that we're throwing at each other these days and come together in a community that's helping, because we all would be in need.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I don't think there's a good answer there.
I don't know if there is. And I like I say, I'm one day at a time. What can I do today to try not to, like you said, be selfish? Try not to be mean or cruel. And it's interesting. I have my youngest son lives with me with his 4-year-old son and 11-month-old daughter. And it's interesting because, the 11-month-old daughter, she's just got her second tooth in today, yesterday. Oh, she was a joy to be around yesterday. So I keep focused. How can I, understand, but I can't relate to her because the only thing she does is the basic body functions and scream. Mm-hmm. But the 4-year-old, he's a delight to be around. He's more fun than dealing with executives. Because sometimes he'll even go put himself on timeout.
Just volunteer for timeout.
So it's a challenge. People are the key to our future. Regretfully, most people are busy looking out for themselves and trashing other people.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think there's a certain level of bashing that goes on, especially behind closed doors, right?
Yeah.
You don't. I find it interesting where people, especially online, will say things about other people, but they'll never say it to their face, right? To me, it's just like I see it all the time, and I usually like to make fun of things, right? But I'll do it in like a fun way.
Yeah.
But there's some people that you'll see it's just very like.
Oh, I know.
It's really bad, and then the worst part about it is the person that they're attacking, they're not even aware of it, right? So a lot of that I see online, and I try not to really be a part of it because I just feel like it's a waste of time. But there are things that my friends will do that I'll make sure that they know that they were stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm about the same place. I look at something and go, do I want to like that, or do I want to do a laugh out loud, or just do I want to ignore it?
Yeah. So, okay. I like that idea. So let's talk about some things that people will see from this interview where they will do the light bulb. So on LinkedIn, there's the like, there's the laugh, that's like the little green, bluish
Sure.
face, and then there's the light bulb, right? You had said that there's tons of war stories, right? But what are some of the stories that, if you were my age, someone in security, someone maybe new, someone that's been around, someone that knows who you are, they don't have to know who you are. What is something like, what is a gem that you have that if you shared it with the world, people would say, light bulb?
Well, no pressure there. The thing that comes to my mind is I've been so fortunate in that I've had so many good mentors. Mm-hmm. When I was in the Army, I was a specialist E5, and I was having a disagreement with the warrant officer who was in charge of the maintenance shop.
Yep.
And I was getting ready to go in and discuss with him my view of the way things should be. Obviously, he ranked me like, I was a fly on the wall. But before I went in, the staff sergeant, who I normally had very little respect for, said to me, says, remember, the person who loses his cool loses the argument. And that was just so insightful at the right time. So I'm saying, don't think you have all the answers. As you're confronted with issues in life, reach out to friends, relatives, people who may be able to shed just another way of looking at something. Mm-hmm. That's to me, that's important, is just to be able to think have somebody think through it with you, and you might end up saying, "Oh, well, that's stupid." Okay, but at least you've not had a gut-wrenching emotional reaction to something and has done something stupid. You've taken that pause and you've gone, what is the right thing to do? Who can I talk to? Who can I reach out to that might provide me some insight?
So less of an emotional decision, more of a thoughtful.
Like a risk-based decision.
Oh, risk-based. Can I get fired if I say this, right? Or, will I get punched in the face if I talk to someone, in this way? I think that's pretty good. Give me another one.
Oh, no.
Give me another one. Because, so when I was talking with Mike said, get as much out of Rich as you can. So lock the doors. You're not leaving.
Well, I appreciate that. Mike has done a phenomenal job there at Grand Canyon. I mean, I just look at what he's done, and I'm in awe. He just went in as a CISO and then took on ACTRA and stuff like this, and he's doing a phenomenal job there. Mm-hmm. So I've been very fortunate to know him and Kim, like I said, over the years, and many other people. There's William Hugh Murray. Bill Murray, not the Bill Murray you're thinking of, comedian, but William Hugh Murray in 2003 put a quote at a conference I was at. It said, information security is a management problem, and as such cannot be solved with technology alone. Mm. That's an important phrase, because remember earlier I said at one point in my life, I was a technologist. And if you got out of my way, I could solve the problem. I could put a computer, I could put a transmitter, receiver. I can make technology solve your problem if I get you out of my way. And what have we been talking about? It's not the technology. It's the people. The people are the answer.
Back to people.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever necessarily come up before. I think parts of it came up, but it was the people in leadership, right? And the effects that those people in leadership have on the people within the organization, right? Within the team. But to me, what I'm hearing from you is it's not just in leadership, it's everyone.
Well, let me give you another example.
Okay, let's go.
I was in southern Germany, and I was talking with this British soldier about leadership. And how he would say, you tell somebody to do something and he doesn't do it, you go kick his butt. I said, well, what happens if you're 5'8" and he's 6'3" and 250 pounds? He said, well, you grab your 6'7", 300-pound corporal and tell him to. So the reason I say that is, we're all in leadership. Every one of us is in leadership. When I see my 4-year-old grandson working with his sister and showing her he's putting certain things in place to get her to crawl a certain direction, he's leading her. We're all in leadership.
It's just what you do with it.
Yeah.
Or how you act with it, right? I could see that. Makes sense to me, because in a lot of conversations, there's usually someone, we'll say senior versus junior. But
situational leadership. There's situational leadership, positional leadership. Like I said, the sergeant and the corporal and the private. Mm-hmm. That was positional leadership, a position of authority. But you can be the person that is the lower ranking or not even ranking person who actually causes a change in the situation by taking it a different direction. Informal leadership is what they call it in the field manual in the Army, informal leadership.
So more so the reaction to the situation versus...
I forget the term that they have, but I'm not coming to you with in a position of authority, but I'm coming to you with a different view, a different kindness, a different way to look at the problem that changes the way you react to it.
Yeah, I think that just goes back to perspective.
Right.
Right. Like if I grew up in a certain situation that was different than yours, I might have a very clear different experience, and
Yeah.
that experience could be could create we'll say certain ways that I might act.
Right.
And as a result of that, I could share that with you, because I can tell you for a fact where I grew up was nowhere like where you grew up.
Right.
I
was blessed. Yeah.
The back door open, never. Right. The front door with the key, never. Right. That just no, because anyone off the street could walk up and bash in, and then everyone's in trouble. Right. So. Yeah, it's just different things. But, from my perspective, I'd be like, you're crazy for leaving your door open. And you'd be like, well, it's perfectly fine. But
it's a neighborhood. In fact, I remember I was about 12 years old. I was a latchkey kid. Both my parents worked. 12 years old, I was old enough to be left at home alone. So one day I got on my bicycle. My friends and I went on our bicycles probably about 3 miles away, and we would go jump in the river. Go swimming.
When your parents were at work?
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, you know what? I got to the river and my mother showed up.
She knew you were going.
Because the neighbors had ratted me out. And they didn't even get a $100 gift certificate.
Wow. So wait, the neighbor kids that went with you? Or the parents of the neighbor
parents
kids?
of the neighbor. So anyway, they heard what was going on, and
Mom found out.
Yeah.
What happened then?
I got clear instruction about what my boundaries were.
So killing instruction, or was there a wooden spoon involved?
Well, actually, that time I think there was a plastic ruler.
A plastic ruler?
Yeah. Ow, and it hurt.
Plastic ruler doesn't seem like it'd be as bad as like electrical cord.
Oh, well, maybe. I was lucky there.
Yeah, so you never had
No.
Okay.
But it's funny because that was the last time I was spanked, and because I grabbed the ruler and said, that's enough. So from that point on, my punishments changed. It wasn't something simple like a spanking. It was grounded or chores or...
Yeah, but back then, with my kids, you could take away they don't have phones, but you could take away their iPad. I have I have a Meraki at our house.
Yeah.
So I can just go in and just like turn off the AP, right? And just shut off the Wi-Fi, and I control them now.
Yeah.
Back then, I mean, it was, from what I've been told, like from my parents, was spoons,
Yep.
cables, or just bare hand,
Mm-hmm.
So it was different time for...
Most of the time it was just bare hand when I was younger.
Yeah, that's the most readily accessible weapon.
I think she was trying to make a specific point that day.
I would imagine. Yeah,
I wasn't a very good swimmer either, so...
You were never worried... So we talked about risk tolerance, right? And like looking at a situation and the risk for it. So like at no point you thought to yourself like this could be dangerous?
A kid.
I know, but you're a security professional.
Yeah, no. It took years to grow that risk tolerance.
Yeah.
I mean, then you don't think about all the things that could go wrong and what's the right thing to do. And
I know. I know it was a dumb question, but I wanted to see your answer. It's like asking someone why a 2-year-old sucks on their thumb, right?
Yeah.
Because they're a kid, right? I thought you'd have a funny answer if I asked a dumb question, but I'm trying to think. So, but we haven't talked about or any of your books,
Okay.
right? And so I'll tell you something that someone told me probably like 10 years ago. Maybe a little bit longer, but it's a really smart guy that I know. He, talk to him still to this day. I think I texted him a few days ago. He's a professional engineer, and probably one of the smartest guys out there that I've met, that from like the mechanical engineering perspective, but engineering in general.
right.
Highest level stamp from the certification perspective. He is now not a witness, but when you go to court, he's an expert witness. So he's now an expert witness,
Right.
and his role is to, as he says, to let other people know that they're stupid. That's his job.
Yeah.
But one thing that always stuck with me that he told me was, there's two ways to learn. You either learn on your own, or you learn by watching someone else make their own mistakes.
Right.
And when you think about that, it can kind of be pooled into books, because a book that you wrote carries your experiences.
Right.
Hopefully it carries fewer mistakes,
Right.
but it has those experiences. But your life exists to where, like Gene,
Mm-hmm.
for example, from the NASA days, would have probably given you some sort of information based on his experience, right?
Yes.
And I haven't found a way where this argument isn't true, where it's either you learn it on your own or from another person's experiences. So I'm curious to hear the different books, right? And maybe the motivations for each, and kind of what you hope to share with the world. So that way these people that haven't read it don't find out on their own,
Right.
but rather find out from, the 50 years of experience that you have. Because I think there's a lot of value in that. Granted, the situations are different.
Right.
It's a different time. Why do you need to understand how things were done in the 60s, when if you have the information now and you ask the right questions, you can probably get to the right answer. But like when you wrote each book, what were you looking to accomplish by sharing that information?
I like that question. First of all, my definitions are wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge is knowing something. Wisdom is knowing something without having to go through the pain of learning it the hard way.
Wait, so wisdom is knowing it, knowledge is...
Knowledge is knowing something. Wisdom is knowing something because you learned it not from personal experience. You learned it by reading it from a book or something. You learned somebody else's experience.
So knowledge would be read in a book.
Yeah, wisdom. It's you're learning from somebody else's mistake. So basically, when I retired, I realized that in this field, I'm now officially unemployable.
So hang on, stop there, because
Age.
Really? You don't think anyone would pay you for what you know?
No.
Ever?
Not even entry level analysts, because no, I haven't seen it. It's a young person's world, and just imagine a CIO that hires me, and I'll come in with my risk acceptance form and lay out real risk to him. Oh my gosh, I'm not young enough where he can threaten to take away my birthday. Hey, take away my birthday. I don't have to go a year older. So I can no longer be intimidated, or I don't have. I just come in and do the job, but that's that, plus the fact I've been out of the workforce now for 4 years. So I'm not up on the latest what's happening. Okay, right now with AI, I'm not so sad that I'm not up on it. Okay, I'm ready to, I've accepted retirement. But in my retirement, I'm still interested in sharing what I learned growing up through my experiences of the different programs and stuff. So I sat down and started writing. My first book I started writing is a series of books called Cybersecurity Sam, and this is book three. Book three of the Cybersecurity Sam sequence. The first book is well, this one. The second book is I'm Back. I'm Home. I think of the title. It's an old guy thing about forgetting titles. But anyway, I started writing these books, and there's a story about Sam, a high school freshman, who ends up working with the FBI to solve cybercrime. He and his buddy are at a basketball game, and his buddy looks at the shot clock, looks at his watch, and tells Sam, when we get the ball, But when the other team gets the ball, their 20-second shot clock, they only get 18 seconds. But when we get the ball, that 20-second shot clock, we get 22 seconds. Sam goes, hey, I know computers. It's not right. That doesn't make sense. So that's how it all starts off. Sam goes to his computer science teacher and does analysis and stuff like this. Ends up at one point, not that I'm not a fan of English, but at one point the English teacher is the main suspect. So anyway, so Sam, that's the first book. The second book, Rosie is I'm back. The problem comes back a different way. And so anyway, I follow Sam through all these scenarios of him working with the FBI and Secret Service, SWAT takedowns, and like in one place, I explain a firewall. These are all written for high school kids to read, and they're written so they can understand. I explain a firewall is like a receptionist. Someone shows up and says, I have a mess. I need to talk to Fred. And she said, okay, well, Fred's right here. Or I have this letter for Joe. Okay, I'll take the letter and give it to Joe. Or a package. Okay, take that around back to shipping and handling. So I was writing these books, and at the same time, I was getting regular email, spam, messages, and stuff like that. It was just junk. So I ended up writing this book, Your Personal Information is at Risk. Mm-hmm. And this is for the average person. This is like, what information is important to you? Why is it important? Where is it? How would you protect it? And here's some of when I get into the electronic stuff, I give real examples of real emails or messages that I've received, why you should realize that this is crap, and what you should do about it. Mm-hmm. So this was another book. So I have a series called Cybersecurity Sam, and Your Personal Information is at Risk. Like you said before, I have a few war stories. And many of my friends have been asking me years to write my war stories down. So I created a book, The Alchemy of Information Protection. Subtitle, A Cybersecurity Druid Spellbook.
Okay.
That's the title. And that's what it is. It's just a collection of things that I've learned over the years, subject-object interface, trusted path, and other things. And in that book, I end up creating a chart that I built over 15 years of showing how to build a data-centric, risk-based security program where compliance is just a byproduct.
Oh, so the Alchemy was the book with the framework.
That's in that book.
Okay.
Is in the Alchemy book. So this is written for the security professional, but it's written in such a way that you can hand it to a CEO, and it's written in terms that they would understand. Because I point out in this book, in the end, all my chart where I'm telling you all these policies and procedures and controls and tools, in the end, it's about people.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can get the CEO to read this book and understand it's not the CISO's data, it's the CEO's data, and he or she's the department head's data, and what it's worth, we have starting to solve the problem.
Yeah, so the S in CISO goes from scapegoat to security at that point.
Yes, and all of my books are self-published on BookBaby. If you go to bookbaby.com and you put in the little scroll, Rich Owen, you'll see all my books. And up until the end of this year, there's a coupon code, JSS1, capital J, capital S, and then the number 1, Johnny Security Seed. If you put that in there, you'll get 10% off, whether the ebook or the print book.
Is it a 1 or a 10?
1.
Okay, JSS.
JSS, and the number 1. So my purpose was that, and I've actually given speeches at some schools, and I still occasionally attend a security conference or two, so I can be the old curmudgeon going, well, wait a minute.
It's about the people.
It's about the people.
Get off my lawn. It's about the data. Right?
Yeah.
And those are the only ones. So there's
There's
four or
actually
five.
those books. Actually, if you sent me an email, you go to send me an email at richowen@cox.net. I have a fourth version of the Cybersecurity Sandbook that used to be on my Johnny Security Seed webpage as a free download.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I've accepted retirement, and I no longer have my Johnny Security Seed webpage running.
Oh, okay. So it's offline.
Yeah. But Johnny Security Seed is still registered to me. I am Johnny Security Seed.
Okay. Where did Johnny Security Seed come from?
I was at home one day, and I was telling my wife, I'll go anywhere, anytime, talk to anybody about security, kind of like Johnny Appleseed, like Johnny Security Seed. That was it.
So I'm going to tell you, I didn't realize that that's where it came from. But I'm going to tell you why I like it, right? Because Johnny Appleseed walked around with apple seed plants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like how you say you're Johnny Appleseed, because if you'll think about what he did, he walked around and he planted these seeds, and those seeds grew into trees, right?
Right.
And those trees fed people.
And had more seeds.
Right. So by writing these books,
Yes.
The Alchemy by Johnny Appleseed, aka Rich Owen,
Yep.
you're more or less planting the seed for people to leave a legacy of what a tree would do. You see a tree, like you see an apple tree, you don't necessarily know who planted it, but
Right.
you enjoy the apple, you enjoy the fruits of the labor, right?
Right.
So I think it's very fitting because, like you said, there's not much else that you're doing in the corporate world.
Right.
But by having the book printed and people reading it, the framework, the 15 steps, right?
Right.
Understanding that compliance is the byproduct and
Right.
not part of the process, right? It's the outcome from the process.
Right.
You're kind of instilling these trees in people's minds of what security should be, and not what it could be perceived as, right? And that comes from a lifetime of information.
Right.
So, I mean, did you say your wife told you, or did you come up with the Johnny Appleseed?
I did. I came up with a Johnny Security Seed. And the books are cheap. Probably the most expensive one is The Alchemy of Information Protection, because I'm selling it to professionals, and it cost a grand total of $19.95. That's the year I got my CISSP.
Is that why you picked 1995?
Yeah.
So, okay.
I was one of the first CISSPs. In fact, I helped create the program of ISC Squared. I helped write questions for the first test. 2021, I'm an ISC Squared Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. So,
How many of them are there?
Lifetime Award recipients? Well, one a
Yeah.
year since Hal Tipton started doing it.
Oh, okay. So there's not very many.
No, I'm also in the ISSA Information Security Hall of Fame. There's a lot more than that. There's about 5 added to that a year.
Okay.
So,
But the Lifetime Achievement Award.
one a year.
What would you say is the reason that you were in the Lifetime? Like, what were the things that they said Rich is the guy for this?
Probably because of my program at Johnson Space Center, and also by helping to create ISC Squared and the CISSP certification. So those are probably key contributors. It's called the Hal Tipton Lifetime Achievement Award. And it's interesting because Hal was a contractor that part of his time, he supported me as a contractor there at NASA. So,
Oh, really?
And Hal was the founder and first president of ISC Squared.
So ISC Squared
Yeah.
came from NASA.
No,
Not-
ISC Squared was created as a consortium between Computer Security Institute, ISSA, SACA, those three for sure. So it was put together as a consortium to create the CISSP certification.
Got it. Okay. But the person, one of the founders was part of NASA. Not that it came from NASA.
He was a contractor to work with me when I was writing this book, in fact.
Okay. Interesting. I didn't know any of this stuff.
Another book, if you want to read it, it's called The Cuckoo's Egg. It's written by an astrophysicist Cliff Stoll. He was in Lawrence Berkeley. He was his grant ran out. Instead of them throwing him out on the street, they put him into the computer lab, and he sat down there and he found a 75-cent discrepancy in the accounting system, and he did scientific method of investigating and found a KGB agent in Germany hacking into their program. So he's written a book called The Cuckoo's Egg. It's pretty cool.
Okay. I want to go back to the alchemy, because you mentioned something earlier about how you broke in to rewrite chapter 1, right? We didn't really go over the specifics of chapter. Can you share anything about chapter 1 and the inspiration for that?
Yeah, in my book, The Alchemy of Information Protection, I was pretty much in the final form of writing the book. It was all together, getting ready to send it to the publisher. And I attended a Cloud Security Alliance meeting, and Mike Manrod was one of the speakers. And he started talking about humans and about the human threat back and forth. And that's when I realized that how important, how my chart, 15 years of building that chart, how good it was, how it was missing the most important ingredient, people. So I ended up writing the first chapter of the book called Hacked because of Mike explaining how important that was. And then in the back where the chart is, I got more into the details of, when I talk about people, we talk about the developers, we talk about the users, we talk about the customers, we talk about the hackers. So all the CEO and each department head. So that's in the book. But Mike was the inspiration for me putting a chapter in the front of that book called Hacked.
So all the years of experience, and it was Mike.
And Hacked it. One simple Cloud Security Alliance.
Changed the book.
Yeah. In fact, Cloud Security Alliance, something else I'm a big fan of. I've been working with Jim with Cloud Security Alliance for years, and I think they're doing a phenomenal job now, especially with the cloud. And since I mentioned cloud, we mentioned Microsoft and stuff and trusting. Okay, I started off with mainframe security, went to network security, computer security, internet security, stuff like that. I was in a company, and we were doing everything in our data center. And the cloud was coming in, and the vice president of IT said, well, I want to put this stuff to the cloud. And I'm going, why? He said, well, because you can be more secure in the cloud.
Because these companies are bigger than us?
And I said, more secure in the cloud? Why should I believe that if we're not secure in-house, it will be more secure in the outhouse?
There's nothing.
And in other words, we're not doing everything we need to do in what we are doing now. And yet when you take your data and put it over here, where I'm not so sure you're going to do all you need to do. Mm-hmm. And now in the cloud, you have a whole different set of risks to deal with. So that was a random thought on cloud I thought I'd throw at you.
No, I think it's good because, when I invited you in, I thought, what are a lot of the things that Rich knows that a lot of people don't understand, right? And what are the things that he can share that people will say, I really appreciate Rich for taking the time to sit down and talk about the things that he knows and sharing with us the things that we could, take. So it doesn't, I guess it doesn't really matter. You could have all kinds of random ideas, right? And I think, my thought with having you in here is there's no time limit. There's no constraints. It's how much can you share and how much can others learn from someone that, like you said, you don't necessarily go to these events anymore.
Right.
Right. You pre-screen all your calls.
Yeah.
Right? I know that for a fact.
Got to leave a message if you call me.
It's hard to get a hold of you. So I think it's just hard for anyone that's new to security to kind of learn from the what I would say is the community proclaimed
Right.
Godfather, right? Because there's a difference between self-proclaimed and community proclaimed, and I'm just happy that you had the time to stop by.
I'm honored that you asked because, like I said, in my stage of life right now, I'm just interested in giving back and hopefully can help somebody avoid stepping on a landmine.
Yeah. So, and the way that they do that is get the
Read
alchemy.
my book.
Get the
Watch his
alchemy.
video.
Just so if there's one book that people have to get, is it fair to say that it's alchemy?
Well, of the books I've written, I would certainly, I mean, it's just a common sense. It's a easy to read. It's not meant to give you the gospel of security. It's made to make you think about how you're doing security.
Yeah, I think from what I've heard from you, it's more so to help tie the responsibility of the data to the people through a process. Right. And then, luckily with the CSA event, Mike kind of brought in the missing part.
Right.
Have you ever told him that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering if he
has
knew.
a copy of my book.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because when you said that, my first thought was, I wonder if he knows this. Because one of the conversations I had last was a gentleman came in and let me know that he had worked with an engineer, a networking engineer, I believe, and they had since parted ways with the employer. So they were at different companies, and they met up again. And the gentleman that he kind of had helped on the networking side, he thanked him. He thanked him for everything that he did for him professionally. He thanked him for everything he did for him personally. And more or less, he said, I want to thank you for kind of being there for me. And when he heard that, and when he told the story, he lit up, right? Because there was, what I would imagine, there was a sense of like accomplishment. There was a sense of like gratitude but more so there was the sense that he had made a contribution to another person's, professional life without realizing it. And he even shed a couple tears when I told him, it's like, I saw the happiness, in your eyes when you described the situation, right?
Yeah.
So I guess all that to say is that the reason I asked about Mike was because if he didn't know, I wanted to make sure that.
Oh, he knows, and his name's in the book.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kim Jones. Kim Jones is one of the reviewers of my book.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yes. So something else about the book. It says Cybersecurity Druid Spellbook. Druid. Where does the term Druid come from? Well, I was in a budget meeting with Gene Kranz, and we're sitting there and we're listing our projects on the whiteboard. And Gene goes up and he draws a line. It says things above the line are funded, things below the line are not.
Mm-hmm.
My project was above the line. Right below my project was a project from the flight directors. It wasn't funded. And the director of the flight directors turned to me and says, where do you and your druids come up with this stuff in the middle of the night? Mm-hmm. So that's part of the reason. And in my book, I talk about, like I mentioned before, one of my hobbies is parapsychology, alchemy, that kind of stuff. So I talk about controls, earth, wind, and fire. Earth is the physical and logical controls. Wind is the procedures. And fire? What do you think fire is? People.
Mm. I was heading in that direction because fire, in my mind, is not very what's the word I'm thinking? Where it's not predictable.
Right.
Right. You never necessarily know.
And it's a catalyst, and it can bring you. It can warm your tent,
warm your hands or
it can burn your tent down.
Yeah, and I was thinking more so along the lines of what is something that's not necessarily predictable.
Right.
And I was kind of leaning towards people, but I was leaning towards like hackers, which I guess kind of falls in line with people. But I think people in general is probably a better, because there is as in fire, with
Right.
heating and warming or burning and destruction, there is a good fire and there's a bad fire, which is no different than there are good people and then there are people protecting the data and there are people trying to get access to it.
Right.
So I think fire is a good one for people.
Yeah.
I don't know, as far as the topics that I wanted to cover, I think we covered a lot of them. But I always like to leave some time at what I expect to be close to the end for people to talk about things that they're passionate about, things that we haven't talked about, things that they'd like to share. So for me, I don't necessarily have anything that comes to mind, leading the conversation down a certain path. We talked about a lot of different things, right?
Right.
We talked about people. We talked about AI. We talked about some of the history. We talked about the books, of course. But I'd like to make sure that before you leave, that we cover everything, right? Everything that you'd want to share. And if you want to come back, obviously you're more than welcome to, right? But, so I guess my question is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel is important to share, or things that, I hate, so here, I'll give you, I'm just going to say this as a thing. I hate when people say, if you could go back 20 years, what would you do differently? Because it's just, to me, it's like a cop-out of a question.
Yeah.
So not necessarily along those lines, but, what are some of the things that you feel that we didn't talk about that you feel should be talked about? Completely up to you. There's, I have no agenda when it comes to that.
It's interesting, the question 20 years, going back 50 some years. I've often thought, in a sense, I wish I'd stayed in school. I wish I did had a computer science program. I wish I could have seen the vision of a computer science program was going to happen. And because I really believe I could have stayed in college and gotten a PhD in computer science. But then I say that and I go, but then I wouldn't have the life that I have today. I'm very pleased with the things I've learned through the hard knocks in life. So I'm very happy with that. I should point out that my alchemy book is one of the source documents at the University of Mary Hardin Baylor, their program for certificate in information protection, information security management. One of the source documents there in their program today. I was one of the architects for their program at University of Mary Hardin Baylor. So I've often thought about what would I do different, and yeah, I wish I stayed in school. But then if I had, I wouldn't.
You might not have
I
been
wouldn't
at
be the
NASA.
same person I am today.
Yeah, so there's not necessarily regrets, but kind of along the lines of what I asked Kim is do you have any unfinished work that you feel? Because you said you're unemployable.
Mm-hmm.
Age, no one wants to bring you in, or whatever those organizations might feel. But is there anything that you feel you're leaving on the table from a security perspective that you could still offer to people?
Not really. Like I said, I've gotten to the point where I've accepted retirement.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody came along and said, we'd like for you to come in for a day or a week, sure. I mean, my heart is still in security. As you can tell, leadership is my second hot button. So, but my heart's still in security. I'm interested in helping people grow. Mm-hmm. And if there was a person that needed a mentor, I don't do huge mentor programs. Some people do huge programs. Basically, when I mentor someone, I get to know them. Spend maybe the first hour on the phone just getting to know them, and then getting to understand what they're concerned about. In fact, Kim came up with a phrase that I use. In fact, I'm going to be using it at a conference. Hypothetically speaking. hypothetically speaking, if you were in a company or if you knew about somebody that had this situation, what are your thoughts on that? So that's great because that way no company information is necessarily being divulged to me. I can just kind of spout off kind of things that I may or may not have done and what worked and didn't work, and maybe some of the fallout or alternatives. And the person can take that and go, yeah, okay, that was something that was helpful or not.
So he actually used that phrase.
Hypothetically speaking, came from Kim.
He actually used that phrase
Yeah.
when I spoke with him.
Oh, okay.
And I'm trying to think of the situation where he used it, but I remember because when he said it, the first thought I had was when I was in college, a lot of people in my classes would say theoretically speaking. Yes. And it irritated me to hear that because it was almost like a way for them to be wrong, but have something to point to and say, well, technically, right?
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like, oh man, it kind of like brought me back to the college days when people would say, well, theoretically speaking, this should happen this way, right? Because I was in school for engineering, so you get a lot of people saying theoretically speaking, because if it doesn't work out that way, they don't want to take the blame.
Yeah.
So when he said hypothetically speaking, it kind of, at the time, it took me back to that. So he did use it at least once. It's a good one. So when is the next conference that you're going to be at?
It's Arizona Technology Summit, September 12th.
So this episode should air before September 12th.
In fact, my panel will have Kim Jones and maybe Mike Manrod and Todd Bell and Dave Bridgman on the panel with me, and the topic of the panel is hypothetically speaking.
Really? So this is the way to get the dirty laundry without airing it?
Yeah, it's like what would you do if, hypothetically speaking, if someone did this, what would you do? Or what do you think should be done? And if you did that, what do you think the fallout would be? Or what else could you do instead of that?
So I want to just take that and use it real quick. So when I was at this conference yesterday, there was a panel with FBI, Secret Service, and I forget the other one, but it was something with the state of Arizona, right? Like there are these agencies or these groups of people that are kind of responsible for fraud, like crypto fraud, and Secret Service, and the other one, I guess he's a really good friend of Lester, but I can't think of his name right now. And then at the end, they ask, if there's any questions, and someone in the crowd, hypothetically speaking, yeah. There was someone in the crowd, and they said, what happens if you know, and I'm paraphrasing, by the way, too, so this isn't word for word, because I'm trying to draw from my memory, but the context is, what happens if you know that there are issues from a security perspective, and you tell leadership, but they're not interested in doing anything about it? And one of the gentlemen, I think it was the FBI guy, said, well, technically, that's not what we focus on, because they're more so like after the fact helping. And then the other gentleman said, it might have been the Secret Service guy, he said, you should probably call a lawyer, explain to them, what's going on, and then figure out your next move. So hypothetically speaking, because I like that.
I know a guy that had that situation, and he contacted the FBI, and the end result was he ended up being fired.
So we talked earlier about incentive drives behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is like not necessarily a black eye in security, but how do security professionals proceed in a situation where the organization doesn't value it, or they view it as a checkbox?
Well, here you go again. It goes back to my risk acceptance form. If that person finds something and they come to my security team, we're going to dig into it and find all the details and document the risk and go to the data owner and say, here it is. The data owner says, Oh, well, that's fine, and signs the form, or the data owner says, yeah, well, let's fix that.
I figured you would say that, but that's why I asked the question, because I
Yeah.
wanted to know. So culturally, the RAF not only helps with building a culture where the people within it understand that the security is not for security people.
Right.
Security people mostly exist as a backbone to it, right? The backbone to the organization from the keeping the data secure perspective. But security isn't just their problem. Security is everyone's problem because it's a people problem, right?
Let me explain. As you said that, it reminded me, so cool, one day, I walked into this conference room and interrupted an interview that was taking place to give the interviewer a $500 gift certificate.
Wait. So the interviewer?
The interviewer who was interviewing the candidate had given me a issue, and it was a real issue, and he was supposed to get a $500 gift certificate. I walked in and interrupted his session where he was interviewing a guy and gave him the $500. So it ended up he hired that guy. So it's not only an impact to him, but the guy being hired knew coming in the door, security is important.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because obviously you made that person's day when you hand someone $500. There's a lot of happiness that probably comes with that.
Yeah.
So my next question, if you didn't answer that, was going to be, did the person get the job?
Yeah, they did.
Nice.
I kind of knew ahead of time that because I knew what the person was doing, and I knew he was going. So yeah.
$500.
Yeah.
Got the job. The other person got it because the person that was interviewing was the one that received it, right?
The person,
Because they work for the company.
not the person interviewing, not the person seeking the job, but the person that had the job.
Yeah, because they were within the same
Right.
organization. Oh man. So hypothetically speaking, is what everyone could look forward to.
Yep.
Do you think you might use that example of if you know something is wrong, how do you?
That's a good question. That is possibly. They're on my short list.
Okay. I like to. So when is that event? You said it's September, right?
September 12th, I believe.
Is it a paid event or is it a?
I don't know. I don't pay to go to events. I'm doing a speaking thing, so
You go for free.
yeah. I'm retired. Remember, I don't have money. I have time. No, not money.
Okay. Well, I was asking because I was thinking, maybe I can make it there and see. Because I think it would be interesting to go in here. Maybe selfishly be like, yeah, let's just use my question. Right? Anything else that you can share about that event, or you just want to keep people on the edge of their seat?
It's been strong here in the Valley for many years, maybe 14 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I used to be on a member of the governing body so I got in touch with the guy who runs it. Then I said, if you have a need, this is what I can put together. And my plan was to have this as a fallback. If you have a session that cancels, I can just grab a couple CISOs and we can get up on stage and do this. And he liked the idea so much, we're now in the main arena, on the main stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you guys like the keynote, essentially like
one of the not necessarily the keynote, but certainly the full audience.
Okay. And Todd's going to be on there? Todd Bell?
Yes.
Okay. I actually reached out to Todd. I got to maybe connect with him again. I didn't see him yesterday, but I messaged him originally for this, so I might just let him know, hey, we had Rich on today, and he said, you've got some good stories.
Yes, he does.
Okay. Well, I covered a lot of the things that I was thinking that we talk about. I asked you about the books. I asked you about anything else that you felt we might have missed. I want you, before I ask you this, or before I say anything else, I want you to guess how long we've been talking for.
I have no idea.
Just guess.
A couple hours.
3 hours and 27 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, security, like I said, it's my hot button. And we talked about leadership, so you hit my two hot buttons. What can I say?
And so we haven't gone the record, unfortunately.
That's fine.
But I do appreciate you coming out. You know, if we can have you again, obviously we'd love to have you. At some point, when I figure out the spacing in here, I probably have to move this cello. But at one point, I'd like to have more than one person, and I'd like to have it where it's kind of you know, maybe 3 people, maybe 4.
Yeah.
I might need another. Actually, no, I have a 4th camera, so we can make this thing work. But I may be contacting you in the next, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, and if we can pull that off,
Sure.
I think it'd be a really really great episode to have you, maybe with Mike and some of the people that you feel are, and maybe not even, I might not even be a part of it. I might just be at the desk, right? But something where 4 people that are highly respected within the community can come and sit and talk, and cover topics that we could capture,
Right.
and share with the rest of the community. So keep an eye out for that. But until then, again, you know, thank you for driving all the way out here.
Sure.
Appreciate the stories. I appreciate you bringing the book for me.
Yep.
Before you leave, you're going to have to sign it. But any parting words for the?
No, like I said, I'm just honored that you have this going, that I'm able to speak, because I have time, not money, and I'm just want to share what I've learned and hope that can help other people avoid stepping on landmines that I've already stepped on.
Well, I'm going to tell you that at least the one nugget that for sure stuck out for me, which I hope, you know, anyone listening obviously got this as well, is that compliance is a byproduct of the process and the framework.
Right.
Before you mentioned that, I kind of looked at it as, you know, something that people do to make sure that they don't have the worst type of exposure they could have from a business perspective, and it was a way to make sure everyone was happy and everyone was safe and things were good. I never really looked at it as if everything was perfect and everything was how aligned the way that it should be, that the result is the compliance part. But very similar to someone's health. You know, if you want to be healthy, you can't just drive to the gym parking lot. You have to eat right. You have to exercise. You have to laugh.
Yeah.
You have to have fun. You have to have friends. You have to have purpose. Those are all part of being healthy.
Live, laugh, love, and leave a legacy, according to the, what was his name? Wasn't Ken Blanchard. It was a guy that created, anyway.
There,
7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Guy that wrote that book.
oh,
Covey.
William.
Stephen Covey.
Oh, Stephen. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have that book. I haven't read it in a while, but I've got it. Yeah. So no, thanks again. It's late, so thank you for coming in. Appreciate that. And this episode will be out hopefully in the next 3 to 4 weeks.